Hey, everybody. Tonight we're debating evolution on trial, and we are starting right now with Planet Peterson's opening statement. Thanks for being with us, Planet Peterson. The floor is all yours.
Sorry, I had some audio coming through on my end. I had to get rid of that real quick.
No problem.
I do have a slideshow. All right, is this going?
Now it is. I'm just going to crop it slightly. And
Sure.
it'll be rolling. What the? Okay.
it'll make sense. It'll make sense. I promise.
Wow. And we're ready for you right now.
Okay, so this is kind of an inside joke. Jim Bob knows what's going on, but some of you may know what's going on too. So we're here to settle the great penis debate. So many questions have been asked. What good is 1/8 of a PP? Where does the PP come from? Well, actually, most animals, they don't even have penises. Many have a one-stop shop for all their reproductive, defecation, and urinary needs. It's called a cloaca. Most birds, which are more recent in evolution than mammals, they don't even have penises, which is ironic considering what a male chicken is called, but whatever. Instead, they produce through something called a cloacal kiss. I'm not making it up. That's literally what it is called. The cloaca, it's actually such an ancient and popular trait that we human beings have them for a brief period during the first trimester, and then if everything goes smoothly, those puppies, they separate. Now, if the job of a penis is to deliver sperm into a female, then we need to figure out how to do some heterodocking. And we can see that starting with a cloaca, a minute modification allows those puppies to pucker up a little more efficiently and without waste or spillage. This is the way a specialized organ can begin. Yes, a micropenis, like you see here on the screen, is better than literally none at all. Once we have the beginnings of one, selection can favor better delivery systems. Now, what's fascinating is that many animals have evolved ways to do this independently. Sharks have claspers, which are not really wieners, they're just outgrowths of their anal fins, but they work like turkey basters all the same. Some bony fish, which are more closely related to us than they are to sharks, have independently evolved their own. So the origin of where a penis comes from and how even a partial peepee is still beneficial isn't a problem that evolution can't solve, even if we never find out exactly how it happened. Now, I've made this argument almost verbatim before, and Jim Bob has heard it before, and he's responded to it before. So in a video he has, Planet Peterson doubles down on nonsense. That's the name. That's about the timestamp. So in response to, like I said, I gave basically exactly this analogy. Before, Jim Bob says, I'm asking how you have those things to begin with. Modification assumes you already have the thing. And what's in question is how you got the appendages to begin with. Now, I think I kind of addressed that and answered that question. I showed at least a plausible pathway. And then another question that's asked, or not really a question, but in response to that, Jim Bob says, no, you granted yourself the thing we're talking about. If you ask how we got a penis from not a penis, well, we can see it. By starting with a penis, then all you have to do is grant yourself one. Now, at this point, I think I figured out what was going on. The question is not actually an empirical scientific question. How can this organ or any organ evolve? It's actually more of a philosophical one, essentially a version of how can something come from nothing? How can a penis come from a non-penis? Now, I think I have already addressed this question, like I said, but I'll take time here to answer it again and demonstrate that this isn't a problem with evolution per se. Now, I have secured a photograph of Jim Bob when he was only 1 day old. And if you don't believe me, here it is. Lo and behold. Now, you'll notice the conspicuous lack of a penis in this picture. Now, none of us, obviously I'm joking, this isn't actually a picture of Jim Bob, but this is what, But this is what all of us look like on the first day of our life. Not the day we're born, not that day, but the first day we begin existing. None of us have any organs or body parts when we're one cell big, but we do have them later on. Body parts coming from non-body parts is a known thing. This is exactly why evolution doesn't have to solve this problem, why I said it's not a problem for evolution per se. Now, embryological development and evolution aren't the same exact thing, except you could argue in the case of what's called evo-devo. But the point is that since we know for a fact that organs emerge naturally, there's zero reason why they can't emerge through evolution, which is just another natural process. Kind of a side rant, not exactly, but there actually was an idea called preformationism, which asserted that either sperm or eggs, this is a sperm obviously, actually contained a fully formed person. And this idea was inspired by the same philosophical problem of, well, how can blank come from non-blank? So they assumed the whole human was there. But today we know that we do indeed come from humble origins. Now, I've heard this question addressed for many different things, for example, a liver. So we can stop talking about penises for now. How can evolution make a liver, for example? It seems a liver is complicated. It has many functions. It works with other organs too. Well, we can break it down. A liver is made of liver tissue, and liver tissue is made of liver cells. Can we find proto-livers in less complex organisms? That would be excellent evidence that they evolved and have changed over time. And that's 100% the case. I found a really exciting paper called Tissue and Stage-Specific Expression. The Zoom thing is blocking my view of the rest of that. Of a fatty acid binding protein like gene from Amphioxus, however you say the rest of that. So this is a study involving many animals, but chiefly a very simple chordate called a lancet. And it turns out they have the same genes that us and other vertebrates do, coinciding with the development of a liver. So the gene sequences for that are on the left-hand side there. And just to discuss real quick, I don't have a picture of one of these fish, but it looks like this thing called the lancet, sort of right there. They're incredibly simple little organisms. They don't have true skeletons like we do, but they do have a notochord. And they don't have true livers like we do. They have what's called a hepatic cecum. So theirs is different from ours.
Forgive me. Just really quick, they let me know in chat that your stream does not have the audio on.
Oh, on my channel. Okay. Thanks.
Just in case you wanted to.
Well, we're just going to have to, that's just going to have to, they're just going to have to deal with that, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good. Here, let me do something real quick. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, James, though. So anyways, yeah. Their liver is different from ours. It doesn't function in the same way. For example, they don't have gallbladders. So their hepatic cecum actually does the job that our gallbladder does. So they have a function we don't. Well, we have that function. It's just in another organ. And their livers don't filter toxins quite like ours do. So ours has a function that theirs doesn't, just to get some of the similarities and differences out there. Now, here's what's really fascinating about this. You can construct a phylogenetic diagram or an evolutionary tree, and that's what is on the left-hand side here from that study, from the paper, just with the liver gene, and it perfectly matches the evolutionary tree constructed for the rest of the genome. So the one on the right, on the top right, that's just from Google Images. I just Googled chordate evolutionary tree, for example, and we see mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, other kinds of more primitive fish, and then the lancets. And that's exactly mirrored with what we have in the study, although they use quite a lot more mammals. But you can see the evolutionary tree breaks down all the same, all the way down until you get the lancet, and then they have a control group, a tapeworm at the very, very, very bottom there. And here is a series of photographs from the study showing the development of a lancet embryo, and it juxtaposes two things I've been talking about. the empirical evidence for how a specialized organ can evolve, since they have a basal or transitionary liver, along with a clear depiction of how even a transitional non-liver can come from a non-liver, as they don't have a hepatic cecum until slide 7 there, where it's highlighted. So we can see more examples like this that pinpoint how the cellular level is where we want to look for evidence and pathways to organ development, which admittedly is a pretty good question and a challenging one. So here you can see what's called a contractile vacuole in a single-celled organism called a paramecium. So this is a video, but I didn't embed the video. So that perfect circle you see on the left, that is water being absorbed by the paramecium. And then on the right-hand side, that's after the paramecium has squeezed all of its water out. This is how the organism maintains homeostasis. So what if you had a bunch of cells that do essentially this same job working together? Well, then you have from just sort of a functional, simple level, you can gain complexity and you can create a tissue that does that job, possibly an possibly an organ. Well, flatworms literally have this. Flatworms like Platyhelminthes, I'm not sure exactly which one this is. Maybe it's the Protonephridium. But they have exactly that. They have specialized cells that I wouldn't exactly call it an organ, but it creates a tissue that takes water in and pumps it out. So this is a very good example because a flatworm is not unicellular. The paramecium is unicellular, but a flatworm, although it's an animal, it's an incredibly ancient body type, an incredibly simple one. And so it doesn't have the same kinds of complex organs like we see today, but it has intermediates like we can see. And we have excretory tissue as well, like, for example, the way you sweat, and you have internal excretory cells as well. So the other thing is Jim Bob and I talked about the debate before we had it, and Jim Bob said he wanted to focus on the 4 mechanisms of evolution. Totally happy to do that. More specifically, I think the plan is to focus on mutation and selection. So I'm going to run through those real quick just to round out my opening statement here. So can random mutation produce new features? I've shown you new features. Can random mutation do that? Well, yeah. I mean, we have all kinds of documented evidence of this happening many times before. I just grabbed a fairly simple one. You can kind of see the purple highlighted sections here. We've identified a new de novo protein coding gene, has a really exciting name, BSC4, that's a scientific name for some yeast. And what they've been able to discover is this yeast appears to have taken DNA that wasn't coding for genes at all, and it mutated to the point where now it does, and it assists in DNA repair, part of a DNA repair pathway. There are many more of these known, antifreeze in Arctic fish, for example. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the theory of evolution is natural selection. It's not just mutations. So, for example, all of the bacteria in this experiment had mutations. Every single one of them had mutations, but most of them die. Only some of them survive. You can see at every interval, the vast majority die. A few make it through, and then they have, you can see the way they radiate through the rest of the slide. But even among the survivors, there are what we could call super survivors, for example. So natural selection is the filter that goes through all of that variation, and then it picks winners and losers, for lack of a better term. And notice how this mirrors exactly our reconstructions of the fossil record. So we can kind of see the macro picture, the big picture in the lab with the micro next to it. And to bring all this full circle, mutations can even help us with the original question, which was, how do you get blank from non-blank? So here are 2 genes and their protein products. Geneticists are absolutely terrible at naming things. These are not exciting names. PITX1 and TBX5, but that's what they're called. Well, these genes regulate the timing of other what are called Hox genes to guide the development of bodies. Now, I think we can all agree that a feather is unique. A feather is not the same thing as skin, and I wouldn't say that it is a scale either. But it turns out that feathers are just modified scales. The timing of that PITX1 gene can force the skin tissue in chickens that would normally form scales to form feathers instead. This is classic Darwinian descent with modification. All vertebrates have this same gene. Now, fish don't have feathers, but this same gene is at work in the equivalent region of the body, and mutations to it cause bodily changes. And humans have this same gene as well, but in us, it does something not even remotely close to producing feathers or modifying the back end of a fish. Instead, it regulates the pituitary gland's release of prolactin. I don't need my slideshow anymore. Prolactin is a hormone that stimulates milk production. So why on earth is a gene that forms feathers in chickens and spines in fish present in us doing the job of aiding in milk production? Well, that's because evolution rarely starts over from scratch. It is, as I stated earlier, descent with modification. And that's all I got.
Thank you very much for that opening. We're going to get over to Jim Bob in just a second. But first, folks, as you can see at the bottom right of your screen, DebateCon 8 this July 25th and July 26th, featuring Andrew Wilson versus Dinesh D'Souza, as well as Andrew Wilson versus Jake Brancatella on whether or not Christianity or Islam is better for society. You don't want to miss it. Check out that tickets link pinned at the top or bottom of chat, as well as in the description box. Get your tickets. It's going to be amazing. It's in Dallas this July, DebateCon 8. With that, thanks for being with us as well. The floor is all yours, Jim Bob.
Thank you. Okay, so what is evolution? The process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. Evolution is also touted as the single most well-established scientific theories in human history. You would think that the most established scientific theory in human history would, at minimum, be able to make its way through the scientific method. Evolution does not. Now, don't worry, Peterson, I'm not going to just keep you on the scientific method. We had that debate. If you guys want to watch that debate, you can find it. I just wanted to point out that it actually doesn't make its way through the scientific method. Now, I want to focus on evolution and the mechanisms. The first two, as mentioned before, natural selection and mutation. Natural selection essentially would be kind of like the quality control for the traits, the differential survival and reproduction for individuals due to differences in phenotype or their abilities. How it works, traits that improve an organism's fitness, ability to survive and reproduce in a specific environment become more common over generations. Mutation, the other one, random mutation, random changes in DNA sequences that create new genetic variation. How it works, mutations introduce entirely new alleles into the gene pool. Most, by the way, are neutral or harmful, but they say some are beneficial. How do you know they're beneficial? Well, you have to wait around and then attribute the trait to some imagined mutation that you didn't observe actually happen. The problem with this is that not only the evolution proponent is relying on the most rare type of mutation to produce novel new features and mechanisms and tools and engineer new things in the organism. Not only is it rare, but they have to actually use this as the basis for all engineering, accidental engineering, by the way. And so it's important to know that random mutation is seen as the ultimate source of all genetic variation. Without the mutation, the other mechanisms like natural selection, they don't have any subject to act on, to respond to. This is the basis of it all. So I want to really get into genetic drift and gene flow. I don't think we'll have time anyway. So looking at the first two, mutation especially, the issue is that mutations occur inside organisms and organisms already exist in populations. But because a mutation itself is a variation of genetics, a population itself is an example of a variation. Now, the basis, like I said, the basis of evolution is that the ultimate source of all genetic variation is random mutation. Populations are genetic variation. So how is it that genetic variation, right, is the source of populations if you need populations for genetic variation? It's completely a circle. You have to grant one. You have to constantly have one always available to you. So there's no way to intelligibly look at a population of organisms with all their components and then try to observe their genetic behavior inside of them, right? And try to look at new traits or changes, adaptive changes that you see. You have to give yourself the populations. But when we ask the evolution proponent, how do you get these populations? You yourself hold that random mutation must be the foundation, must be the source of these populations. They go, well, you start with populations. So that's a big problem with their view. That's why they can only talk about evolution once they have a variety of populations. The other issue with mutations is that most mutations are neutral or harmful, but even the ones that are claimed to be beneficial still have to explain how extremely complex systems with dedicated tasks are engineered from purely incidental changes in genes. There is no demonstration of this. What you get is a demonstration inside a micro frame, and you say, look, this is reacting this way, or look, there's a mutation that did this thing. But there's no example of a mutation that leads us to believe that a long form construction and engineering pathway towards, let's say, not even the liver. I use the liver a lot, but I've actually moved on, Peterson, to the vestibular system. The vestibular system is a good example. You have to say that random mutation produced over time, engineered a vestibular system. Now, James, I did put a picture of that. If you can get it in the chat, if you can put that up, that would be great. So my opponent must defend the position that random mutation builds the specialized features like the vestibular system. But not only that, he must defend that random mutation also builds the mereological relations. That is to say, the part-whole relationship. So things that he even pointed to inside of his opener, they're in relation to other existing things. But the other existing things must be also the product of random mutation. So the only way they look at evolution is they isolate certain things and they sort of block out the other things that are already relational to that one mechanism. So he said he appealed to like vertebrae, he appealed to livers. These already exist in systems. These already exist in existing populations that have form, that have bodies, that have function already. They already have metabolic. They have systems that take in and break down and build up, right? They have these systems already. So he won't be able to do either. I would argue it's an unreasonable task, not for the lack of knowledge or time, but rather it relies on a baseline assumption that hyper-specialized functions like the vestibular system are features that are purely incidental downstream from totally random mutations that just incidentally produce the vestibular system. Now, I don't know if you can bring that up, James. I want the audience to actually see and understand the vestibular system here.
So it is showing.
Okay.
So actually, what I'll do is I'll make it full screen, and that way it's a little bit
clearer. Yeah, you can hide me. Yeah. So as you see this is on one side of an ear, right? This, by the way, is matched in symmetry by another one on the other side of the ear. But keep in mind that these two systems, even though they're mirrors, one does one thing and another does another thing, but they work together. So they develop, you got to imagine, from Peterson's view, random mutation started producing this system with no relation yet to the brain, no relation yet to anything. It had to develop, right? But independent, right? One side and the other. And it has to make sense, one side or the other. Now, the vestibular system, by the way, is what accounts for our balance, our ability to have spatial awareness, to know when we're tilted or not without throwing up and getting sick. This is built in, and I would argue for us today, necessary for for us to arrange ourselves and navigate the environment. I think without this, without help anyway, we would probably die. And I want you to see that on the left side there, that those little cords there, those might as well represent a natural gyroscope. That is, there's an X axis, a Y axis, and a Z axis, and they all interact. So when there's pressure and sensors on one, the other one is kind of inhibited, right? This has to be incidental from Peterson's view. It just accidentally created a highly specialized, insanely complex gyroscope for our balance. Now, that's not all. Inside of these tubes there that you see, the vertical tube and the two horizontal tubes, inside of there is a liquid that needs to be very precise called endolymph fluid. The endolymph fluid is specialized. It has to be a certain ratio of the fluid because it has a very specific electrocharge. This has to be incidental. So in order for this system to work, you have to have an accidental maintained electrical charge of 80, right? It has to be exactly that. And if it's off, people get sick. They have to go to the hospitals. It acts basically like a battery. And so this, you have to imagine the view, and it's totally fair. This is not incredulity. It's not because I can't imagine it. What I'm saying is that from the evolutionary view, you actually have to tell us how it's the case that random mutation builds these engineered miracles inside the body. I'm not saying it didn't happen because I can't imagine it. I'm saying it's on the person proposing that it did happen through random mutation and natural selection. How did this happen? Seems fair. My own kid would ask me, what do you mean? How would that happen? How could that happen? So that's important to look at the vestibular system and other things because you have to keep that in mind. These are seemingly engineered things that have function, and yet they come from completely directionless random mutation and chemical reactions. So you could bring that down, James, now. So not only does evolution have to explain the engineering of each hyper-specialized feature, it has to explain the mereology between the features and the mechanisms, while simultaneously arguing that the generations of organisms are changing into categorically new organisms. This is really the basis of evolution. So the Pakicetus in 15 million years went through all the changes, and essentially its lineage led to a whale. This has to be explained through random mutation. That means the body plan that is the Pakicetus on the land, maybe the size of a wolf, acts like a cow maybe, starts fishing with its hoofs, dips its little legs in, and over time, voila, starts eating fish, and eventually it leads to its end, which is the whale, which might be turning into something else, as we know. So this view has to be actually justified through their mechanisms. They can't just say it happened because the time allowed it. They have to actually explain mechanically, how does this happen, biologically speaking? And I never get an answer to this. Now, you could use the penis argument. In this case, I would use the vestibular. And this problem of how things are built not only is included with every appendage or part inside a body, but the wholeness of the body itself as a plan, as a workable system. So you look at it from the view of there's a factory that's called random mutation that produces appendages and bodies over time. There's a thing called natural selection in the other building. That's the quality control. Now, this is another problem under the evolutionary view, because as random mutation, from Peterson's view, builds these intricate systems that do stuff. They're super functional, right? They have tasks. They have such oriented tasks that when you look at one and it's failing, you go, that's not properly functioning right there. That assumes there's a directionality to what it does. It's not incidental, but Peterson actually has to hold that it is incidental. So the thing is, while these things are being built over time, and there's a long time period when finally the vestibular system is itself what you see it today, the natural selection aspect is also pressing on this change. So if it's the case that a vestibular system comes from a time where it wasn't developed to the point it is now, the natural selection process wouldn't favor that thing unless you argue that every single step of the way between not quite the vestibular system we see today and a totally unfamiliar looking one in the past, every step of the way, that system has to be favorable to the organism. That is to say, natural selection selects for it because it does something, right? It keeps it around because it wasn't killed, so it'll pass on. But if it's adequate for having, why would there be a pressure then to change it if it's developed its adequacy? Now, you have to say, well, it starts optimizing. There's a bonus. But optimization right? In any way or sense of the word we know it, optimization is still towards something. There's a direction of optimization. You can't argue that optimization occurs if it's purely incidental. Accidental optimization, this doesn't make any sense logically. So if you introduce optimization, which assumes directionality of a process, you can't hold the view that the process is wholly produced by random mutation while simultaneously holding to a direction toward betterment. It's getting better at doing something. That doesn't mean anything under the evolutionary view. Better, accidentally better, this doesn't make any sense logically speaking. Natural selection has its own problems as well. The idea that mutation is random, but natural selection is not, which we often hear, it's not entirely true. Natural selection refers to the external environment selecting for existing traits. But wait a second, the external environment, that seems more like a generic conceptual thing. It's not pointing to anything specific. So what's the environment? The environment itself is a collection of particulars, many of which are themselves biological organisms, also changing constantly. Then the physical conditions of the environment, right? Weather, climate, all this stuff, natural events, these are also in flux. So there's another big philosophical problem here that I probably won't press too hard on, but I want people to know it. How does an ever-changing system of organisms, ecology, and physical conditions produce a regular process called evolution? How could you even understand natural selection if the environment that's doing the selecting is also made up of changing things? You couldn't possibly track it. It's all in flux. So you have to invent a static view of the environment while you hold an isolated highlight view on the organism and say, look, the environment, abstract concept, is selecting for this thing, but the environment's made of all these things that are changing. So the environment itself that's selecting is also composed of a bunch of random things that are happening, right? Totally dictated by random mutation. So that's a big problem. In order, let me see, where am I at here? Those organisms need to maintain the nature of what they are. This is another problem, that when we look at nature, in order for something to be prey or a predator, for something to be dependent on the external world, grass, flowers, whatever, berries, these things maintain some identity, right? In order to make sense of the natural world, the animal kingdom, we look at it and it's in a symbiotic relationship. It gives and it takes, and it coexists, right, in some sort of equilibrium. If everything's changing, how it, like if everything's changing, that means food's changing. That means the food for something is changing. It's not just the organism. It's the way in which the organism participates in reality is changing, because the reality itself is in flux. So this is a bigger problem when you look at the grand scale of evolution. But again, I just wanted to get that out there for my own audience in particular. But I will be focusing mostly on the granular aspect. And I want one last thing here. He mentioned the penis coming from the penis. Notice that Peterson wanted to give an example of a penis coming from something that doesn't have a penis. He looked at an embryo. The problem there is that it still comes from a penis. The embryo is the byproduct of an existing organism that has a penis and a vagina. And so the problem with that, as an example, Peterson, is that that embryo, if that was actually human, it's already coded with DNA markers for the penis to grow or not. It's already in the system. So the nature of that embryo is actually that it does have a penis. It already has the information to eventually have a penis. The markers tell you when that's going to develop in the embryonic stage, as well as the arms and everything else in our body, because it's informed by a previous thing that does have a penis. So if you were going to use that embryo as a snapshot and say, look, Jim Bob, a penis doesn't have to come from something with a penis. Here's an embryo. No. You go back one step, that embryo came from something with a penis. So the penis is still there. You have to keep going back in time, and eventually you have to come to a place where this appendage and its purpose reveals itself. Here it is. Okay, voila. Or you have to hold a view. You have to hold a view. Okay, you have to hold a view that there's gradualism, and that for everything that has function today, every step of the way in its development, it was as functional. It was just as useful, but it's still changed over time.
With that, we're going to jump into the open dialogue. But first, folks, if you did not know, Andrew Wilson and Owen Shroyer will collide on the East Coast. That's at the end of this month. So we are just a couple of weeks away. Not even a couple of weeks away. Andrew Wilson and Owen Shroyer will be debating. This is in the Carolinas, University of South Carolina in particular. Tickets are linked in the live chat, and they are also in the description box. Check this debate out. Come on out. Modern Day Debate is thrilled that Uncensored America invited us to be the moderator for this debate, as well as this next one that I'm going to show you. So come out and meet your favorite debaters, including Rachel Wilson and Brian Shapiro. It's going to be amazing. That is linked in the live chat, as well as the description box as well. Oh, that's right. I got to update the page. As you can see at the bottom right of your screen, Rachel Wilson will be debating Brian Shapiro on feminism. You don't want to miss it. And that is in North Carolina, East Coast, last week of this month. With that, we're going to kick it into the open dialogue. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, for the sake of our audience and us not getting clipped saying penis a million times, well, let's switch over to something. I do want you to maybe look at the.
We can focus just on the four things. Well, the first two of the four things. Sure.
That's I want to use the vestibular system just briefly here.
Sure.
When you looked at it, like I said, this system is highly complex and functional and task oriented, and it's so precise in what it does. I didn't even get to the crystals. There's crystals in this system as well that weigh down on things, and it's very precise. And if it's off a little bit, it fails. And so the question I had is, like, from your view, if you were to take a purely random mutation approach, you'd have to say that random mutation started the pathway toward this thing being generated, right?
Yeah, I would say that. If I did a little bit of Google searching, I could find some stuff in the fossil record for the development of the inner ear. I'm not going to do that here because that would be kind of boring. But
okay.
So what I can point to, what I know off the top of my head is, so if a trait is evolved, then it should go through stages. It should, like the modern forms of things, we should expect to see kind of like transitional variations of it. Now, again, I'm pretty ignorant about the fossil record when it comes to the vestibular system, but there are lampreys and it's just lampreys. So they're a really disgusting eel-looking fish, but they don't have jaws. They just have a sucker. So they're an incredibly ancient and archaic body type, but they do have bones like we do. They have semicircular canals, but they only have 2. We have 3. So, I mean, that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head as far as those. But yeah, I mean, there are many things. We'll never have the complete picture of how it happened. But when you see in nature different variations of the same thing, less complex versions and more complex versions, I think that actually is pretty excellent evidence that it evolved. I have a few more things on this, but I'll let you respond to that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're saying there's other things that have similar shadow ghost structures in the past, and maybe those are simple forms. And so if there's simple forms and there's a more complex form, you can imagine that a simple form of it could actually, through random mutation, produce into a more complex form of it.
Yeah, it would be unreasonable to think that our vestibular system, the mammalian one with 3 semicircular canals, could have just been produced by the random, even with natural selection, the random thing, just in its full-fledged state. Instead, we would expect to see transitions, and I can think of at least one with the lamprey.
Yeah, I'm not under the impression that your position to defend this is that random mutation built this thing and it was like a bunch of elves building it and they finished it. Rather there has to be sort of a provenance of this item, right? This is like an item in the if there was like a showcase room, here's an item that does something in here in this body, and it has to have a past from the evolutionary view. And so, but the view is that random mutation itself, that's the first mechanism that actually starts building this. It's a building process, correct?
Evolution is a building process. I mean, you can say that, I guess, yeah, but that's kind of weird because that entails that evolution is this one thing when really it's a combination of things. I mean,
For this specifically, like you look at that vestibular system inside there and the tubes, and I mentioned that there's fluid inside the tubes and has to be a specific ratio of for it to be properly it basically uses electricity to receive pressures in the form of sound to send to the brain in a meaningful way where the brain can interpret it. But here's what I'll ask you. Is it this fully formed vestibular system from the evolutionary view is incidental, correct?
It's incidental in the sense that there's no reason that any organism had to develop a vestibular system. I was jotting down notes while you said this, because this is something that people say quite often. Where did that actually go? So when you say something like, how did it just happen to create this vestibular system? Like I said, it didn't have to. So like the thing I wrote down is, why can't goats fly? Wouldn't it be really awesome if goats could fly? Well, we're not the ones that get to say, this is the way that you evolve. If you don't do it this way, then you don't function in your environment, then it's no good anymore, or the organism won't survive. No, I mean, there's evolution doesn't have any foresight. It doesn't have any teleology.
Right. So, but if it doesn't have teleology, then would you admit that use of the word optimization is just it's not really optimization, it's just accidental optimization? Like organisms don't optimize, they just accidentally change, and it's just lucky that that accidental change is advantageous in contrast to the environment itself. It's just like, oh, that was a happy accident.
I mean, you can I was going to say serendipitous. Yeah, that's what that means. You can say that, but it seems like you're kind of just saying the organism doesn't optimize, the environment, the filtration process mechanism, whatever we want to call it, of natural selection does that. But it still occurs. I mean, it's very hard to imagine how this process would have created a complex system like a vestibular system, but we know for a fact that this system happens today. The reason antibiotic resistance occurs, the reason viruses mutate to be able to jump across species, they're not trying to do any of that. It is just for ones because of the genetic variation within them, it's just innate in some of them that some of the time they evolve down a certain pathway. Now, what we do is we tend to look at the end product and say, oh, that's the only way it could have happened. No, it could have happened a million different ways. COVID didn't have to evolve. It could have evolved to infect cats instead of humans, for example. It happened to evolve a different way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's just all of that's incidental, though. So even the defense thing that you just mentioned, the ability for the body to have an immune system that gets triggered when there's some intruder, right? The triggering of the immune system that jolts the body into responding, right? That system itself, in addition to the vestibular system and everything else, from the evolutionary view, it's purely incidental.
Yes.
As far as this production of it.
Yeah, but I don't think that's a problem. So, for example, what the vestibular system does is it's your sense of balance. You have fluid called lymph, and you have otoliths, which are the little stones, and they brush up against hair cells. And when they brush against it, like if you hold a candle and you move, the candle lags behind. What's in your inner, it does exactly that. I know you know it. I'm telling the audience.
Yeah, and the other side, and the other side is a mirror of the same system, but it actually serves a slightly different compatible purpose, right? The other ear.
Well, they do the same thing, but they're mirrored. Yeah.
They compensate for different things, but they're the same function, but for different they balance us in different ways. And so that's the thing is, like, if it's the case, I do think
let me get something out here real quick, because if it's the case that, oh yeah, organisms wanting to know the difference between up from down, left, like want to know I'm sideways, then you have to evolve a vestibular system. Well, actually you don't. Moths, for example, I don't know how common this is in other insects, but moths, they have a completely different system for this, and we just discovered this. The reason moths fly around endlessly a light bulb is because they have what's called a dorsal light reflex. So when light hits their back, that tells them that's where the sun is. And so it triggers their body to just automatically balance upward. Like you don't have to think about your sense of balance. Yeah. You just do it innately. And moths have that. So that's how they can tell up and down. They do it with the sun. So if this is a problem and we have if not really a problem, but like if the vestibular system serves a function and we're trying to say it could have only happened this way, then how the heck did it happen independently a different way? I think that's a way stronger indication that yes, it is an incidental product of a serendipitous process. And it could have been a million different things.
Yeah, but that from that view, then if the vestibular system is, from our view, it's like we look at this and we go, oh, engineering. Now, I'm not making an intelligent design argument. I'm just looking at it like, oh, that does something that's functional and useful to the body, for the whole body, right? That's a functional thing. And then you look at anything else, it's super functional. The liver is functional. It does a task, but it's not there to do that task. It just, it didn't generate through random mutation to do that task. It just incidentally happens to do that task, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing with respect to this that you were mentioning that's also pretty common is, well, it has to create a complex vestibular system. And if it doesn't create the kind of vestibular system we have, then nothing works. The organism doesn't survive. That's a pretty common sentiment, but I think that's totally false too.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't put it that way. If it sounded like that, I'm saying that the vestibular system we have from the evolutionary view, we actually got it given to us from another organism that already developed it.
Yes,
to some extent, right?
Yeah.
But if you keep going back, it necessarily can't be that that the OG grandpa with it had it in his case. He was like, I'm going to give this to all my children. There has to be a moment where the thing as we see it on the screen today actually generates from something many, many years ago from the evolutionary view that's not that. Perhaps something that's not even, you couldn't even recognize it, correct?
Is essentially, yeah, but it wouldn't have progressed in the sorts of leaps and bounds. It's not the case that one day an animal that has a rudimentary version of this, but without the semicircular canals or like without one piece, somehow enough mutations happen in an organism it gives birth to that now the one it gives birth to has the fully modern version of it.
Right.
No, it would have been so gradual that you can't say in any one generation, this is the modern version of it, and the one generation before it wasn't.
Yeah.
It's so gradual that it doesn't.
Would you say would you say it's so gradual that you can't possibly say how it happened?
No, I would say I can give you a super low resolution answer for how it happened, which is random genetic variation with selection, which is technically testable because if all of the other, like all vertebrates have this vestibular system, and this is actually demonstrated in that paper I had, although it was about a different organ, you still see the same thing. All vertebrates have a vestibular system, but if evolution's not true, there's actually no expectation I would have at all that the genetic code for the vestibular system would be broadly the same, for example, in all the mammals. Yet it is.
Well,
but that is the hallmark of a hereditary trait.
I understand, but Peterson, then if you zoom out more to the process, you go to mammals, and now mammals are the new vestibular system subject, which is if mammals, even vertebrates themselves, if if they had to necessarily be generated through random mutation over millions and millions of years, then the thing you call a mammal, with all of its unique features that puts it in the mammal category, has to have a past that isn't mammal, right?
Yeah, technically.
Yeah. So on what basis would we use any of the four mechanisms of evolution to believe that a mammal was actually produced from not a mammal through the systems that you're actually appealing to? Which one of them is going to give you the idea or any reason to believe inductively even that mammals as we know it actually come from an entirely different schema of an organism that don't have vertebrae. They're not vertebrae. They don't have spinal cords. They don't have livers.
Yeah.
They don't have these things. What reason do we have to believe that that category is actually produced from not that category?
Well, what I would say is I wouldn't exactly use the framework of how to tell me how to get how I can answer that question through mutation and selection. Instead, what I would say is in science, what we do is we say, well, this is our model, this is our theory, our hypothesis, or whatever. What are the consequences of it? If it is the case that that's what happened, then there should be evidence for it. And the genetics and the fossil record bear this out incredibly well. The mammals are most closely related to the reptiles, and way back like 330 million years or whatever, we have these so-called mammal-like reptiles. That term's not really used anymore, but we can see kind of the evolution of modern mammals in the fossil record, and how we were so similar to reptiles really early on. Now that work was all done in the freaking 1800s and early 1900s, and then later, when we discovered genetics, it was like, okay, now it's time to put this idea to the test. And then yes, so mammals outside of our own group were most closely related to the reptiles, exactly what the physical evidence before that predicted it should be. And then you can look at the genes that control for organs. Mm-hmm. So the mammalian genes for the semicircular canal, just like the liver we looked at, are all going to be more similar, and they're going to match up exactly with an evolutionary tree to as compared to anything else, but then we'd be more close to like a reptile.
Okay, it sounded like at the beginning you said I wouldn't appeal to the four mechanisms of evolution to describe the transition between from reptile to mammal. But what you would do is look at some sort of model and use basically a philosophy to map on and see if it actually would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, like if I can, I don't know if you're asking for clarification or if you thought that that didn't make any sense.
No, I think I'm making a distinction between you're not using the current knowledge and mechanisms to describe and explain, right, the transition between non-mammals to mammals, that there's some sort of jump.
Yep.
But you said you're not going to use that, right? But what you will use is basically a philosophy and interpret the data through a philosophy, and it doesn't make sense through the philosophy.
Well, kind of. What I was trying to illustrate is more like a hypothesis and then a test, which I think in the spirit of science is what you're supposed to do. But I mean, at the end, it actually does come back around to mutation and selection, because what we circle back to is the genetics, and we look at, okay, what are the degrees of differences in the genes between these animals? Mm-hmm. And what causes differences in the genetic composition? Well, it is mutations. So it actually does come full circle back to that. I was just saying I wouldn't start from the bottom up and tell you the story of how it happened. I would say, look, if this is the case, then this is what we would expect to find. We do find that, and then we can go back and retest it too.
Okay. How would you test that reptile over time changed enough to then make the jump to a mammal? How would you test that?
Well, you can look in the so it didn't happen exactly that way, but you can, we'll just say that is the case. You can look in the fossil record, for example, for transitional forms, and then you can look at the genetic composition of the animals as we see them today.
Okay, so you look at old fossils That's
Yeah,
phenotype.
yeah,
Phenotype.
we don't have any future fossils.
I know, but old. I mean, they're old. Like they're not like because
very old,
you can make a fossil pretty quick at home.
Wow.
You can, yeah, you can.
Not a real fossil, but
Well, no, I mean you could actually produce what the effect of a fossil at home in 2 weeks. But that's why I said old. You take an old thing that looks like it's like a reptile, right? And you have access to a particular, and it's a phenotype, right? It's something that's a phenotype. You don't have the gene, right? You just have the phenotype, the anatomical structure of this old reptile.
Yeah, all we have are the impressions of their bones and sometimes lucky enough skin and eggs and stuff.
Okay, so when I asked you, how would you test if an old reptile that doesn't exist anymore, perhaps, made its way through genetic mutation and actually made the jump through successive generations to a mammal, and you said you find an old fossil, you look at its anatomy, and you look at similarity between the anatomy.
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't it the case that there's existing similarity between anatomy without ancestry, common ancestry?
Well, in our view, everything has a common ancestor at some point, but you're talking about convergent evolution. So, for example, hedgehogs and echidnas both have short little spikes on them, but they're both mammals, but they're distantly related. What we mean by that is this phenomena is hedgehogs and echidnas don't both come from an original ancestor that had spikes. They evolved it independently. So what you're talking about does happen.
Let me ask it a different way. Does similarity in phenotype necessarily mean similarity in genotype?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. No, not necessarily.
Okay, so if that's the case, how is it you're going to test whether or not you're just looking at something with a similar phenotype? But if you say you're looking at this thing with similar phenotype, but you're making the jump that the genotype actually produced and jumped to mammals, because you'd actually have to say it happened genetically to say that this thing we found that was reptilian looking made the jump to mammal, but you just admitted that the phenotypical similarity doesn't actually necessarily follow to phenotypical similarity doesn't necessarily follow to genotypical similarity. So I'm not sure how you're going to arbitrate the test then, because you're just assuming the similarity you're seeing, you could make the jump to mammals, but also you already know that similarity in phenotype could be dissimilarity in genotype. So you can't actually test it because you don't know if you're looking at a fossil that's just phenotypically similar, or you don't know if you're looking at a fossil that's phenotypically similar and genotypically similar.
I would say that we can do this. James, I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay. There we go. So I would do it literally just by going back to this. So it'd be nice if I don't have a evolutionary tree of life with fossils on it. I mean, those exist. I just don't have one like on hand. But on the right here, that's essentially what this is. So decades, like literally centuries, like over 100 years ago, we started doing this. We put the mammals at the top, not to say they're better or anything like that, but we put the mammals in one group. The reptiles were the closest connected to us. They were the closest branch. The amphibians were the next most distant, and then different kinds of fish all the way down the line. So this is what we constructed just based off the fossils. So we have a phenotype tree of life, like you're describing. Now, how do we know if that's from genotype? Well, we can also study the genes of these organisms today. Now, we can't get the genes of the extinct ones, but like people don't disagree that dinosaurs were a kind of reptile. We don't have their DNA, but we know that today's reptiles are the same kind of organism that dinosaurs were, reptiles. They're different kinds of reptiles, but the same kind or whatever. So we can actually contrast genotypic analysis and phenotypic analysis. the phenotypic analyses are actually a prediction for what the genotypic analysis should be. And the genotypic analyses basically all came true exactly like what the phenotypic analysis thought they would.
Yeah, but
I would say we can do the thing you're talking
about. I don't think that's a test, though. That's more like you can confirm the model and assumption by drawing out some pathway, chronological pathway that makes sense to you. But the thing I'm looking for is the falsifiability of it. How do you, like, look, we'll take a very simple example. You find a bird.
Could have 100% been falsified if because you can do statistical correlations of genetic similarities. You can create a scatter plot. If the scatter plot shows no correlation, then evolution would have been falsified.
No, I'm talking about for the things you find that you don't have access to the genetics of. This is really basic. Like, you find a fossil, and anatypically it looks like something today, and you think, well, maybe that's a mammal, but it has a similar anatomical structure. Maybe it evolved or something, right? If it's the case that anatomy, phenotype doesn't actually entail genotype, when you say there must necessarily be a jump between non-mammals to mammals, the question isn't just whether you think it could happen. You got two questions. How do you determine that it happened just by looking at a fossil that you don't have genetic evidence for, any data for? But further, how does random mutation itself explain the jump from something that's not a mammal to a mammal, right? It doesn't make any sense to say there's a thing, it has a universal category called not a mammal, right? And your view, you're imagining this long process with enough changes, there must be this moment where it makes a jump, right?
No. So this is the way I usually compare it is like with language. So we can all agree that 3,000 years ago, nobody spoke English. So how is it that people speak English today? Well, it isn't the case that one day parents gave birth to a baby and that baby was like, yo, what up, mom and dad? And they said, well, I don't know what they said because they don't speak English.
Yeah.
It's the language I speak. The parents couldn't understand it. No, it happened so gradually. The changes are microscopic every generation, where when you compare generation 1 to generation 2, you really can barely find any difference. But when you compare generation 1 to generation 10,000 or whatever, then at the end, 1 in 10,000 are completely different, but none of the steps in between are different.
Okay, but for one, the language analogy doesn't work because the differences in language is the differences in sounds and symbols that represent things that don't change. So what an apple is doesn't change regardless of where you bring that apple in the world and say, what do you guys call this, right? So that's not a good analogy, because a true analogy would be the reference themselves change. The thing that you're actually using language to name actually changes over time. That is to say, an apple over time through successive generations has mutations to the point where it becomes, through successive generations, not an apple anymore. It's something else. If you make that claim, you're actually jumping universals. You're jumping a universal thing, like a Pakicetus is perfect, right? It's my favorite example. There's a Pakicetus. It's like a land cow that's the size of a wolf. It's on the beach. It starts stomping on a fish, some crabs. It gets excited. It goes further in the water is the story. In 15 million years, there's enough random mutations that it actually produces a whale. But this view, from my view, Peterson, put on my hat for a second, how many different things, like the same way we call something a Pakicetus and call something a whale, how many different universal categories that we could name exist between the Pakicetus and the whale? You know what I mean by that question? Like how many?
Yeah, but it's just like, this is just when is a heap not a heap? How many times does a grain of sand count as a transition?
Peterson, I'll tell you why it's not. I'll tell you why that's not a good analogy. Why? Because in the heap of sand, what sand is doesn't change. The amount changes. So the beard, the light, these are analogies that are pointing to the scale of something, the volume of something. We're not talking about volume. We're talking about the thing itself. That's like the proper analogy would be, when does sand no longer become sand through evolution? It's not the amount I'm talking about. Otherwise, I'd agree. Yeah, there's this weird gradient. How do you know when the beard is a beard, right? We know where it's not a beard. There's plenty of people out there who should just make up their mind. But it's like, when it comes to animals, it's a different question because it's not volume, right? And you can't use the light category either. Some people use the spectrum of light. The reason that doesn't work is the frequencies you're looking at between the polars, they don't change. And if you took a little sliver of a gradient where it's like ombre or whatever they call it, that frequency wouldn't change either. Those things don't change, but your eye perceives this gradient. We're talking about something else.
But I think it actually, I'm going to go back to the thing you said about an apple, so don't let me forget that. Okay. But I think the spectrum analogy actually does work because every organism exists in its own period of time and it doesn't turn into anything else. And that's exactly how every wavelength on the spectrum is. Treat the wavelength as the organism in its own generation. The next wavelength is the next generation. You can't tell the difference between this wavelength of light versus this one. But once you've skipped enough of them from one end to the other, you can tell the difference. Eventually, red is orange, but there's no...
Red is not orange. No, that's false. The frequency of red always is the same. The frequency of red, that frequency never produces something called blue. The frequency of red maintains its frequency in its solidity. Yes. And then you move, your eye moves. That's what's actually changing, is your eye moves away from that frequency.
You have to treat, I mean, I'm just going to say what I already said again. You have to treat every slice, every wavelength as the next generation. If this wavelength of red produces the next generation wavelength that is basically indistinguishable from it, but on some microscopic level different, once you stack enough of those up, then yeah, you can get blue eventually.
Well, no, but blue is already static and unchanging. All right, we're talking about...
Or it's static. Individual organisms are static and unchanging.
No. For this analogy to work, you'd actually have to say the frequency that is blue, the frequency itself produces a different color for this analogy to work. The difference between the frequency analogy or the heap of sand is that the thing we're pointing to as the referent, that doesn't change. What you're saying is that, and I really think this is a defeater to the view, is that you said the slice of life that is the Pakicetus, that lives the way it lives, and it never changes what it is. It's always the Pakicetus. Every successive generation next is the Pakicetus. That entire category will die the Pakicetus, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But at the same time, you're saying Pakicetuses themselves lived long enough to start producing variations. At some point, they're not the Pakicetus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a contradiction. The Pakicetus as an identity can't exist and die as itself as a universal category and also eventually produce something it's not.
Yeah, because you're thinking of it in terms of one day a Pakicetus has to turn into a non-Pakicetus. Look, the label we give it is arbitrary.
Yeah.
But the data isn't arbitrary. The events themselves aren't arbitrary. Going back to the Apple thing, like you said the language analogy doesn't work because you were talking about the reference. The Apple never. Well, actually, I think you should think of it as in terms of what makes an apple what an apple is. It's the genes in it, and what makes words and language what they are. It fundamentally, well, what makes a language what it is at the fundamental level are phonemes and to an extent grammar, but whatever. And the words. So just as microscopic, the genes, generation by generation, just small portions of the genes in the gene pool, the composition, the ratios, or whatever, change over time, just like fragments of our language change over time, then yeah, that does actually produce the change because the apple is dependent upon its genes to be the way it is. So you can't just say, apple is apple. Like you're treating that as a separately existing thing from its genes when the only reason it is the way it is because of the DNA.
Couldn't you and I, establish a weekend where we invite people and we literally in 2 days change and make up an entire language with our intent?
This has literally happened before.
I know.
Especially with sign language.
I know. So if that's the case, this analogy fails because language itself doesn't need a long time to evolve into different things. We could, by our intent, we could just change language because symbols aren't reality. Symbols are just references to things in the world. The reason this fails, again, the language fails, is because it's a category distinction. Symbols and sounds are not identical to the things they're referring to. Evolution is arguing about the things in the world, reality itself, elephants, lions, people. These are things in the world. They're not symbols. They're not sounds. These are things in the world. You're claiming a thing in the world in its category, eventually through random mutation, changes and produces something in the future that's not it. So can you tell me any example of why we would believe this? Can you give us any example where something actually produces something inside of random mutation, sexual selection, that it's not? Anything that produces something, it comes from the thing that's produced actually comes from something it's not.
Okay, I wrote that down so that I know 100% that that's the next thing we go to. But I'm going to go back to the language thing just briefly, because you're calling it a category error, but it's because you're comparing the wrong things. In my analogy, the language is analogous to the organism. You keep bringing up how the language references something. Nope, the language is analogous to the organism. The words are analogous to the individual genes or like nucleotides of its DNA. Those are the only two things to compare. So much like English is not the same thing as the word banana, it's the totality of the lexicon that is English. An organism is not one of its genes, because we share, like for our hemoglobin gene, chimpanzees have the exact same one, but a chimpanzee is not a human, so you can't reduce it. You have to look at the totality of it, and it, as the words microscopically change, as the lexicon changes a microscopic bit generation by generation, it doesn't change, it doesn't become a new language in any one particular generation. But eventually, once the whole lexicon changes, it is, or to enough, we could say, then it does become a new language, just like once the gene composition of the population has changed enough, then it does become a new species. So I think it actually is basically a perfect analogy. You're adding something that's not part of the analogy to try to call it a category error.
It's not analogous for what the reason I said. One is language is at the effect of humans' intent. It's a tool that we make. We make language. Humans make language. It's not the things that are changing can be arbitrarily changed all the time. I can change it tomorrow. I can teach my kids that pineapple actually means refrigerator. That can be done anytime. There's no additional mechanism needed for that. And symbols and sounds, these things are not in hard reality. What we're talking about is something that's physical through a process produces eventually something that's outside of its category. So, I don't want to stick on the language thing too much. We'll just disagree on that being analogous. But can you give an example of a biological organism through its sexual features produces something it's not?
So are you asking me, because it sounds like you're asking me an example of a time where an organism gave birth to something that wasn't the same organism as it. But evolution doesn't work that way.
I know. So if everything we see inductively about biology is that successive generations through asexual or sexual reproduction always produce something like it that's slightly different, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So if and the only reason we can say there's variation is to necessitate a category that there's variation in. So if I said there's a variety of types of ice creams, I couldn't make sense of a variety of ice creams unless ice cream itself was a universal category I was referencing, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So, ice cream, you couldn't develop such a variety of ice cream to the point where ice cream, the flavor itself, the new thing that was produced, wasn't ice cream. So the same way everything we look at is we're human
I
beings,
think
right?
you could.
Well, hold on. It wouldn't be ice cream anymore.
I mean, if you added one ingredient at a time to it, it could eventually get to the point where there are so many other things.
Well, now it's a variety of another thing, though. But that's the point, is that variety, this is what I'm trying to get you to concede on. Variety, the term variety, here's variety. There's four things. Four things of this, right? So to say variety is to say that there is a universal that there is a variety of, right? It's not very controversial.
I mean, it sounds reasonable.
There's a variety there. There's a variety of songs. There's a variety of trees. There's a variety of crabs. There's a variety of things. To say there's a variety is to actually hold to a universal category that there is a variety of. Now, if you keep adding variety, you actually abandon at some point the category you're in. But now, what is that a variety of if you have abandoned the category that it's in? What is it a variety of?
Well, it's not like it's not like things. The identity of things is not floating out there somewhere, and things are waiting to turn into them. We gave all these labels. That I was actually thinking about this earlier today. The problem you're describing is it's just kind of a. I don't see how it could be any other way. Like, if conscious, intelligent creatures like us existed before creatures walked on land, and they passed on their knowledge all the way up until the present day, then you and I, we wouldn't be called mammals. We would be called hairy fish, right? So what we call something, what we label something, so we would never stop being fish. And this is like cladistically, people like to make the argument, yeah, actually we are fish because we're part of the fish clade, you know.
I would argue
that would have happened, but I only need about 10 more seconds.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So that's what we would have just been called hairy fish, right? So I said this earlier, the labels are arbitrary, but the data isn't.
Okay, so I would argue, because clade is another thing I'm interested in, cladistically, there would only be one clade. Really, objectively speaking, there could only be one
life.
clade.
You could say life. Yeah,
that's it, right? Now, are you saying
no? But you can have more than one clade because
hold on.
Literally, just think of a tree. A tree has branches that are not connected.
Okay,
but they are all connected to the trunk.
Okay, you guys use cladistics and species, right, and subspecies. Okay, so if you use cladistics to make sense of the tree of life, being that it's all just one big living organism, essentially, kind of. How do you determine when a clade begins, objectively speaking, or is it completely arbitrary?
I wouldn't say it's completely arbitrary because, for example, you can't say that we're part of the reptile clade. Reptiles and us are part of a different clade, but we're not part of their clade. Just like
I understand.
This branch and this branch are part of the same tree.
Yeah, there's a tree. But the thing is, with a tree, all the branches of the tree, in this analogy, the tree is all maintains its treeness. This is the same nature of a thing the branches are coming from. So the question was, what criterion and methodology do you use to discern whether a clade began chronologically?
I mean, I don't know if I have a very good answer for you off the top of my head. My intuition is telling me that, yeah, it's going to, at some level, be pretty arbitrary. But again, the actual physical characteristics of the organisms you're looking at, the actual timetable in which these things occurred, the data itself isn't arbitrary. I mean,
but it's nominal, isn't it? Isn't the data nominal? You know what I mean by that?
Not 100%.
I mean, like, each data point is unique to itself. That the arbitrary categorization of all the data you're admitting that the categories you're putting the data in to make sense. For instance, species, right? Evolution holds that speciation occurs, right? Objectively, that occurs.
Yeah.
Okay. But you also hold that species, the term, is totally arbitrary.
No, I mean, I would say the labels are arbitrary. There really do exist meerkats.
Hold on, wait, hold on. Forget the term meerkats for a second. Species itself, right? Species, the definition and the standard for what constitutes a species, is that objectively established or is it not? Is it just like a useful temporary tool for just kind of putting things in that are that could maybe, like, I don't know, reproduce with their own kind or something?
There's more than one definition of a species, I think, is probably the answer you're looking for. But I want to really quick say that kind of like what I discussed in my opening, we're treating this particular thing we're on like this is a problem with evolution per se, but it's not. I mean, I hate to go back to language, but it's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. There are hundreds of dialects of English. So when do we declare that one of them all of a sudden becomes a brand new language? It's going to be
arbitrary.
Yeah, it'll be. So this isn't a problem for it. Like, this doesn't make evolution true.
Wait.
They're just
it does.
Interesting,
is
difficult philosophical questions.
No. Is biology arbitrary? The way things operate?
I don't know what it would even mean for biology to be arbitrary.
No, you would say biology, the way it operates, we couldn't actually do any inductive analysis of biology unless we took it as regular, the way it operates, just how biology operates, right? How things operate, how they behave.
It's not random, it's intelligible, it's complicated like the weather, right. But we can know things about
that's not arbitrary, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but the thing is, if biology is not arbitrary, but you're referring to species and you're using language, but you admit that language is completely arbitrary, I'm trying to understand from your view, how could you argue in an objective way for evolution if admittedly all of the things you're appealing to are arbitrary?
Again, I don't think that they are arbitrary. I think the labels are. If we had existed at a different time, like if we had started this process, I mean, it would have to be absurd, like an absurd number of millions of years ago in the past. Then the labels we would have for things, we'd have fewer clades, for example. We have the totality of all the evidence before us, and then we parsed it out and put it into the categories we did. And we did so kind of in an arbitrary way. But again, the data is not arbitrary.
Is there any, but the amount of clades, if it's arbitrary, just like that's why I asked you, how do you determine the criterion and standard for what a clade is or when it begins? And you don't have an answer with that, and that's fine. But I promise you, when you look into it, you're going to come to the conclusion that I could actually declare that the beginning of my family, myself, me as the father, and everyone after me is the beginning of a clade, and you really couldn't argue against it. So you just mentioned numbers of clades.
Well,
would be limited, but the thing is,
I think that would just be scientifically false because you're a Homo sapiens, just like me.
No. Watch, go look, try to find an objective standard for a clade, and tell me you can't arbitrarily just start a clade. There, you can't tell me where a clade starts.
A clade is. I mean, maybe somebody could tell you where it starts.
I searched high and wide.
Okay, I can take your word for it, but a clade is a group of I don't think it's reduced to a species, but it's a group of organisms and all of its descendants.
Yeah, me. So, I'm the beginning and all my descendants. I declare flag in the ground, I'm a clade. Yeah,
but you're still in my clade that goes back to Homo sapiens because they're your descendants or they're your ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. Arbitrary. There can only be one clade, really, if from this view. And so if species is arbitrary and multiplicity of clades is totally arbitrary, but just useful just in time to talk about things, then we're not actually referring to biology. You admit biology. We're not talking to the thing itself, biology, its operations. That's not arbitrary. That's occurring, right? Evolution is trying to deal with what's occurring, right? I'm not going to take language away from you, the sound we use. That's arbitrary. But I'm saying the way you're describing evolution, the things you're referring to, they're not in biology. You can't find them in biology. And so that to me is a problem, because you're arguing that this transition happens between categories. But when I press you on what a category is, that becomes arbitrary. So how could there be a change in a category where you can't tell me the difference, the start and the end of any category? That doesn't make any sense. The category of Pakicetus is not the same exact thing as a whale, but you say the Pakicetus in 15 million years turned into a whale, right? I'm being hyperbolic. But that's a category difference. But when I ask you, how do you distinguish when a category changes? And you say you can't. So how could you say the sentence, yes, the categories of animals through random mutation and natural selection change Pakicetus to a whale in 15 million years? And I go, but what's the how do you know the category changed?
Well, because we have overwhelming fossil and genetic evidence that Pakicetus is the ancestor of whales.
Well, no, that's question begging, because the thing that's in question is...
That's not.
It is. It is. That's just affirming the thing that's in question. To determine it's actually the ancestor is to say, just restate the position that the Pakicetus is an early form of an animal that through successive generations and random mutation produced, in a long form, produced what we now know the whale is, right? That's what you're saying happened, right? Stating that it happened again because you looked at similarity in anatomy doesn't actually tell me where the transition of category actually occurs.
No, because we didn't come up with the idea that Pakicetus is the ancestor of whales before we found it. We found it, and then like forensics work, people connected the dots. I mean, this is exactly like forensics work. At first, they use physical evidence and clues from the environment, and then today they would hopefully be able to use DNA evidence to pinpoint, look, we claimed that James Coons is the person that did this, and then we find James's DNA there. That's not question begging. We didn't come up with a new story that arbitrarily just confirmed the original story.
There's difference there, though.
We said there has to be this evidence, and this evidence is it. So we have overwhelming supportive evidence.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Another analogy that doesn't work, because something like a crime or a murder happening, you have access to the scene. You have access to back knowledge of what murders are. You can recreate the murder, and that's what forensics does. I took it in community college. I probably should have continued it. The reality is you can reinvent and test and do these things over. They literally wave axes with fake blood to recreate this stuff. They shoot bullets at glass to recreate angles. We can play with this stuff, and we can access James' information, his DNA, his fingerprints, his height, his shoes, his clothes, his hair, and we can see if his body transplanted itself on that scene in so many ways, right? This is not the same as there once was a land cow the size of a wolf. We connected the dots through anatomy to make the claim that the land cow, through reproduction, turned into a whale through just genetic. And I go, how would you know that? Like, how would you even test? How would you even explain that through just the mechanisms that we're covering? Like, honestly, how would you explain how genetic mutation, random mutation, produces variations that it builds entirely new body plans that ends in 15 million years as a whale? How would you even explain that?
Well, I mean, we kind of know how that happens because they're called homeotic genes, and we can see the telltale evidence of this occurring because James, can I share my screen again? I can talk about whales for a really long time, but I'll try to make it short.
We'll go into the Q&A maybe in about 10 to 15 minutes. And folks, if you haven't yet hit that like button, we do appreciate your support.
So this is a Pakicetus right here, and that's an Ambulocetus there. Now Pakicetus, obviously it had legs, right? So but we think it's the ancestor of modern whales, and modern whales don't have hind legs, right? So if there's a transitional form, then what we would expect to find are whales in the fossil record that have fairly well-developed hind limbs, but didn't really use them for much. And that exists. Basilosaurus, it's really small, but the picture on the bottom labeled A, that's Basilosaurus. It was a massive, like nobody would argue that Basilosaurus isn't a whale. But what the heck is Basilosaurus doing with these hind legs? And they were so, I don't know, does my cursor show up?
I don't see it on my screen, but
I see it.
I see it on the Zoom though. No, but I don't think the audience
Zoom,
does.
but not on YouTube.
The audience does see it.
Oh, I don't see it.
Oh, they do see it. Okay, so
On my
right here
side,
where
at
I'm
least.
circling, proportionally, that's how large the hind limbs are. Not used for any kind of locomotion, obviously. And even, I would argue, even worse is Dorudon right there. So letter B, it's much smaller than Basilosaurus. But look at these legs. I mean, they're just such tiny, pathetic little things. But there's a hallmark in the skeleton of these extinct ancient, definitely whales. Like nobody argues these aren't whales. The question is, are these also the ancestors of modern whales? Well, they have this bone in their ankle called the talus, and it takes on a form that they call the astragalus. And Pachycetus and Ambulocetus have it too. And then we see it in these Eocene whales. Well, today, the only other animals that have it are even-toed hooved animals, ungulates.
Okay, but can I just stop you there for a second? Because you're looking at similarities. By the way, the little whale thing that you think is a knee or a shoulder or the remnant of a leg, that actually does have a function. It helps them during mating and orientation in swimming. But you have a much bigger.
Used for walking or anything.
I know, because it has a function for swimming and mating. So the thing is, you're looking
changed over time.
No, that's what you're trying to prove, that it changed over time. You can't just say that it did, because things that are similar looking, right, and have similar functions, it would make sense if they have a similar function that they might show up and look similar. By the way, we have eyeballs, and other animals that are not like us at all have eyeballs. If I found eyeballs...
Yeah, but there's a genetic test for that.
No. If there wasn't a genetic test and I just looked at anatomy and I just saw eyeballs, I wouldn't come to the conclusion that because of the eyeballs and where they are, that must be an early ancestor of mine because they have eyeballs. That's just one similar thing. And it's similar because it's functionally similar. Okay, let me ask you this.
Eyeballs are a bad example because eyes have evolved 40 different times in the animal kingdom. Like the mollusk eye is completely different from ours. So we don't look at those and think that it's an ancestral
how do you determine
ours.
Look, Peterson, how do you determine whether something's similar because it's functionally similar? It just shares a function, so that necessarily it looks similar. How do you determine that? Or whether or not it's because one thing turned to another.
Yeah, you look at the genes. So I'll stop sharing my screen here in just.
You don't have access to the Pachycetus gene.
But we look at but we have access to its skeleton and
you don't have access to his genes, dude.
Yes, I know, but we can tell what kind of animal Pachycetus was from its skeleton, and then we still have these kinds of animals today. And then, so we test it. So all this evidence says, look, yeah, maybe it's just a coincidence. And there's many other skeletal things I could talk about, but I'm not going to waste time on it. We could say, yes, maybe it is just a coincidence because of convergent evolution and all that. But then what we did was we said, okay, well, if this is actually what happened, then the even-toed ungulates are the only other animals that have this. So test the DNA of whales and ungulates, and if they're the most closely related, then that's overwhelming confirming evidence of shared ancestry.
It's not.
And that's exactly what happened.
I'll tell you why, because the answer is still unanswered. How do you determine that the similarity in DNA, which is a similarity in the function of things, like there's a DNA marker for where a leg grows or a knee bending or whatever, the growth of a thing bending, right? Elbows, knee joints. If there is, for anything that happens in the body, there's necessarily an instruction manual that's in the form of DNA to instruct what it does, where it does it, how it does it. Because animals share similar composition and instruction manuals, like it's all written in the same code, basically. How does it follow that they come from each other as opposed to, oh, similar function? It doesn't occur to me as a coincidence that similar function would look, when you look at the instruction for that function, right? Well, a banana is a good example. People say, oh, we're related to banana. But when you really look at what the DNA you're looking at that's similar, what's similar is the function of that DNA in the banana. It doesn't follow that I come from a banana or we're ancestors to a banana merely because we find similar code in it that does a similar instruction procedure for the organism. Like that, the jump you're making, and this is why I asked for methodology. If you agree that there could be similarity in DNA based solely on function, that they share a similar function, if that's the case, you're going to have to give an additional methodology to determine whether or not they have some sort of close relatedness chronologically, like one comes downstream from the other, because they don't follow that doesn't follow because of what I said. Is it true that DNA could have similar function between two things, but not come from the same thing?
Yes, in certain contexts that's the case, but
yes,
this really doesn't work. So, for example, it really does not work the way you think it does. So, for example, sharks and dolphins have tail flukes, but if we look at the DNA controlling the genes that form those parts of their bodies, they're not even remotely similar. The dolphin DNA for its tail fluke, for those homeobox genes in that location, are going to be vastly more similar to a kangaroo than to a shark. So this whole, the structure looks similar and
so
the code looks
similar.
Similar.
So they come from kangaroos?
They don't come from kangaroos, but they're more closely related.
Yeah. No, that proves my point.
Them and kangaroos have a common ancestor.
No, I think you misinterpreted me. Just because I didn't say that anything that's similar functionally has to share similar DNA, because you would put dolphins not in the same categories as sharks, right?
Well, they're not mammals. There's something that they're in the same category as.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows my point, is that things that have similarity in their instruction manual, it's not a surprise that similarity in instruction manual might produce similarity in features, functions, right? Just because something, what was it, raccoon hands, they look kind of like ours, like smaller, but pretty close looking, or there's a variety of things that have wings and the structure and the movement of wings. Just because they share similar features doesn't mean they have the same DNA informing the features. But if they do have similar DNA informing function, it's not a surprise that the features and the function are similar. Like it's downstream from the instruction itself. That makes sense to me.
So we're almost to the Q&A time. And earlier I said, I wrote down what you said so that I wouldn't forget it. And then we actually never came back to that. I just realized it. So you asked the specific question, give an example of something that produces something that it's not. Then I asked a clarifying question. Do you mean an animal gives birth to a completely different animal or something like that? So I do have an example. I'm pretty sure that would fit that for you, which is we have done this with yeast. So yeast are unicellular, but we did an experiment where we said, could we get an organism to evolve multicellularity? And they did. I mean, I could describe the experiment if anybody wants to, but just in the interest of time, they got the yeast to become multicellular, and it's not just, the yeast, they just clump together. Okay. No, they're actually unicellular, because if you pull them apart, they die. So it's an obligate multicellular organism.
What's the first thing we're starting with?
Yeast.
And what's the thing you end with?
Well, we don't know what to call it because we created something brand new right in front of our eyes. So instead of afterward having the like Adam in the garden, all the animals are there and he just started naming them. Well, what the heck happens when something new comes up? And like, well, I didn't have a name for that yet. Now I don't know what to call it. Scientists, like, if a new species just all of a sudden appeared like through hybridization or whatever, it is kind of like that has happened too. We've renamed them. Yeah. But this is way more extreme than
it sounds like. It sounds like you'd call it multicellular yeast.
Yeah, but yeast is not multicellular. So it'd be like you turning into a unicellular thing. Like that, I don't think, and funny enough, something like that has happened, because Henrietta Lacks, for example, her cancer cells are still kept in petri dishes, and she died decades ago. She died in like the 60s, I think. But her living tissue is still in petri dishes, and cancer research has been done with it. But nobody would say that Henrietta Lacks is in that petri dish. I'm also not arguing that that's an example of evolution, but nobody would say that Henrietta Lacks is in that petri dish.
I would say that example, though, not the cancer one, but the yeast one, that's an example of humans manipulating yeast and producing some sort of thing. But I don't think that's really relevant to the question of, like, we're talking about categories of things that then successively produce more things. The yeast invention thing, like if I introduced something and it altered a particular organism, scientifically what you're studying is whatever you introduced, what was the effect on yeast? That's scientific. Okay, the effects on yeast, if I introduce this and it does this does this to the yeast. But you wouldn't be under you wouldn't be under the assumption that if that happened in reality, that new thing called yeast that happened immediately and required human intervention to do it, that would live on and then reproduce again to something else, right? That's not what you're assuming. You're just looking at an example of you introducing something to yeast and it producing some effect on the yeast. Now, if you call it some sort of mutant that you did to the thing, that's the science you're doing. That still doesn't defend the view that a Pakicetus over time can then, have children and make its way into the ocean, restructure its entire body over time to become a whale, add blubber, really complex temperature controls, know how to have sex and hunt underwater, right? This has to develop, right? So how does a Pakicetus go into the water and develop the capacity to hunt when it's required to know how to hunt while you're in the water? Like, this doesn't make sense. This is like a children's book. Like, in one day, it was fully in the water, or one 500,000 years section of time, it was fully in the water and it finally submerged. No, these body plans, by the way, I didn't even get into the math, Planet Peterson, but the math alone for the Pakicetus story in 15 million years to become a whale. Forget the orientation of the body and the new schema for the body. Forget all of that. If you study flies, right, the current math on flies, just 2 regulatory genes, changing that, like, that takes a long time and they're still flies. You add that to humans, just 2 regulatory genes changed for humans, right? It doesn't change humans. In a million years, it doesn't change a human. But in 15 million years, the entire body plans between a land cow, the size of a wolf, in 15 million years, it becomes a whale. I didn't hear a single good reason to believe that's the case other than it probably happened.
This might be...
yeah.
If you guys are ready for it, this might be an opportunity. If you want to give a pithy response, I can give you a chance, Eric, but one of you guys is going to have the last word at some point. So
you can have it.
This is go ahead.
I would just be saying something I've already said before, so it's fine.
You got it. We're going to jump into this Q&A. I want to say, folks, a couple of things. First, both of our guests are linked in the description box. The guests are what make modern day debate amazing. So check out their amazing links right now. We're going to jump into this Q&A. If you haven't yet, hit the like button, please. It means so much. With that, this first question coming in from, do appreciate it, and we're going to move fast. Greek archaeology says, the great what debate? What the? The original Christian says, Planet Peterson, in the example of the one-day embryo, the information to develop a penis pre-exists in the DNA. Where did the information come from?
DNA. What? I think what they're meaning is, how is it that information is programmed into DNA? Information isn't this separately existing thing that DNA has to absorb. Information is a description of, information is just a description of, I don't know what the definition of it is, but you could essentially say it's kind of like a property that matter has. So DNA is literally just a chemical. People treat DNA like, oh, it has to have information. Literally, a carbon atom has information in it because it has 4 valence electrons, and that tells you how it forms specific chemical bonds. But nobody goes around saying, oh, how did carbon get information programmed in it? Because they view that as trivial. DNA is trivial too. I know I have DNA and I think I'm pretty special too. And my mom tells me that also, but it's literally just a molecule.
I would just add to that, though, that even modern information theorists, who are mostly atheists, by the way, define information at minimum data, pure data plus semantics. So I would push back and say there's nothing, let's say, in an apple, the structure of an apple, crunchy, all of this. There's no aboutness found in the apple. There's no actual information. There's just pure data, I think, what you're saying, Peterson. But the question of information is it's meaningful, that there's a transfer of meaning. So in other words, when you brought up the embryo, what the person asking there or pointing out is the embryo you're pointing to already has from its parents the information and the DNA and the markers for when the arm and the penis and the eyes are going to develop. So his question was, where does that come from? Well, it always comes from a parent, but now you have to go back and another parent, right? It's like you keep going back, right?
You've got to go to the next one.
Back. Sorry,
Eric, I don't want to. I want to give you the last word because the question is originally for you, but we have to just to move as fast as we can through the Q&A. If you guys are able to keep the rebuttals to a minimum. And
sorry.
Go ahead, Eric, if you'd like a chance to have the last word.
So I wrote this down earlier. So when we're talking about like the penis or whatever, the information, you say, well, it doesn't work because it comes from a parent that had that body part or whatever. Yeah, but it doesn't come from that body part. And to say it comes from the parent, it's kind of accurate, but actually at the reductionist level, it comes just from the genes. It's genes that produce bodies and body parts. And so I think that's just evidence that evolution can do that kind of thing.
You got it. This one coming in from, do appreciate your question. By the way, I want to remind you guys, both of our guests are linked below. Check out their links. Richie Torres MMA says, TP has the whole based on the bones meme on his wall.
Based on the bone, yeah.
This one from Apollos.
What that means.
Christian Apologetics says, evidentialism is superior to presuppositionalism. If your worldview requires YEC in science and now, you should ditch apologetics debate. And high PP.
Evidentialism. Well, I would say the first claim, regardless of how old you think the Earth is, the first claim is evidentialism is superior to presuppositionalism. To do evidentialism, you actually have to presuppose things. You would learn this in basic philosophy of science 101.
This one from Apollos Christian Apologetics also says, high PP and for both. What about a third option? Evolution is true, but pseudo, parentheses, not absolutely, random. Selection is guided by fine-tuned laws, thus evidence for theism.
I mean, I would agree that the reason natural selection works the way it does is because of the laws of physics. The reason an organism survives well, that its genes are conducive for it in its environment, is going to reduce to physics. But that's not evidence for theism because we don't know what kinds of things a supernatural, we don't know what kind of world a supernatural God can and can't, well, it can produce any kind of world. But we can't tell if this is that kind of world or just a universe that can exist just on natural law.
I also push back on that person because it could be the case that just like an alien race coded this local world that way. So it doesn't actually get you to God, which general theism is probably a weaker position to hold.
This one
could just be an engineered world.
This one from Richie Torres MMA says, question for PP. How does evolution affirm identity? How does a dog keep his identity if it came from a non-dog?
I mean, I would just say that evolution doesn't give prescriptions or anything like that. Like we're asking evolution to do something. Evolution is a scientific idea that we come up with. It's like, how does capitalism determine the value of a dollar? It doesn't. We do arbitrarily. Yet you can use the dollar inside the system of capitalism and that all works fine. You can describe all kinds of things like that, but
This one from F.111 says Jim Bob didn't learn his lesson after Professor Dave hooked him. Personal incredulity is a MF. Mother, father,
Personal
Big
incredulity.
W, Eric.
Monday to Friday.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think what was exposed, and by the way, he refused to do an actual formal debate with me after that. But I think what was exposed, and I wish we got to it today, Peterson, because when you admitted that the vestibular system was incidental in what it does, we didn't even get to the purpose position, which I went with Professor Dave with, not a Professor Dave with, which is if he admits that his brain has no real purpose to think, then there can't be any proper way the brain works or doesn't work, which means his reasoning is gone. But Professor Dave doesn't do any philosophy, so he didn't understand how brutal that was, and apparently neither did the person who just super chatted.
This one coming in from, do appreciate it. The real in television says for both, what is the difference between macro and microevolution? For Jim Bob, do you accept microevolution and just reject macro?
No, what you call
Go ahead.
microevolution is adaptation. Like I said, to say there's a variety that can happen, a variety of things within an organism or even a group of like organisms inside of a species. To say that could happen is to necessitate this static category. So a variety could happen in the context of a category. So I don't deny that adaptation, but adaptation actually is stronger evidence that there's a directionality and use for DNA instructions, that it's capable of responding in certain ways in environments. That's to say it's already in there. Evolution at macro is saying that entire categories of things through random mutation produce highly specialized things like the vestibular system or the brain or the heart, and it's totally incidental. Not only that, while it's doing that, it's changing its category of what it is at the same time. No, that's what you guys call macro. You guys smuggle in evolution to adaptation. It's just adaptation. The things themselves don't change. Things about the things change. That macro says the things change. Micro says things about the things change.
This one coming in from, do appreciate your question. Even Lord says, I like Jim Bob, but I have the smoking gun of evolution, crabification / carcinization. Non-crab species evolve into crab-type crustaceans. W planet, W
That's an
Jim.
assertion.
This one from, go ahead, Eric.
No, it's like this is a popular meme among paleontology enthusiasts, but it's a well documented thing that organisms, it's a convergent evolution thing. Organisms that are not like true crabs keep independently evolving the crab body type of the shell and the segmented arms and all that. It's
functional similarity.
You got it. This one from, do appreciate it. Chase K says Peterson, prior to H2O ever occurring / merging, under the right conditions, was water possible to emerge? The state - ice, liquid, vapor doesn't matter. Oh, okay. They're saying the state, whether it be ice or liquid or vapor, doesn't matter.
Can you read the first part? When did it become possible for water to form?
Yeah, they say prior to H2O ever occurring, under the right conditions, was water possible to emerge?
Sure, because the properties of hydrogen and oxygen exist before any hydrogen or oxygen molecules get close enough to each other to form a covalent bond. So, sure.
This from Brian Peck says, when can we have creationism on trial? Woo, juicy. We should host that. We need some, they say, Jim Bob's poor polemics aren't going to be able to provide a valid defense since its offense is already his poor.
Who's coaching you to read these? Creationism is based in a faith position. So, when people go, it's creationism versus evolution, I think that's a false dichotomy. I think that if evolution is true, it should be defended on its own without smuggling in creationism. If creationism was true, it wouldn't be spoken about in the dialectic of naturalism anyway. So I have no problem taking a fully faith position in creationism. Defense of it couldn't be evidentialism. Like, I wouldn't actually put that in the same category. So, my faith is based in practice in the Orthodox tradition. And so I could make arguments for why I believe creationism, but if you're a naturalist, you're never going to accept any argument that is purely empirical.
You got it. This one from Pokemon fan 001 says Manor would embarrass both of these clowns again. I think that's Manor's sock account. Austin Sims says evolution won't be defeated by an argument. Jim Bob, can you find me a primate or mammal that isn't also a craniate, chordate, vertebrate, or olfactorin?
Well, none of them are, because as Peterson admitted, and I got every evolution proponent to admit, those are arbitrary categories. They're not objective categories.
You got it. This one from Austin Sims strikes again, says, Jim, are whales mammals? Yes, that's game over for evolution denial. Explain why an ocean animal has land, mammal, anatomy inside it, including placenta.
That's question begging. All you're saying is most of the mammals I know are on land, therefore the whale came from the land. That's all you're saying, but that needs an argument.
Well, they were just saying a whale is a mammal. So,
well, was it always a mammal?
Give a just fit. Well, yeah, it was.
No, it wasn't. No. Planet Peterson.
No,
you admitted. No,
Pachycetus was a mammal.
You admitted that mammals come from not mammals.
Yeah, but whales never were mammals.
Yeah, no.
Your ancestors are not.
No, whales.
Your ancestors aren't what you are.
Whales come from non-mammals, right?
Yeah, but whales have always been mammals.
Really? When did they become mammals?
So the direct ancestor of a whale is also a mammal. So
when did it become a whale?
Whales have never not been mammals.
When did it become a whale?
When did what become a whale?
A whale.
When did a whale become a whale? They never weren't whales.
What are you talking about? If a Pachycetus became a whale over successive generations, you have to tell me, when did a whale become a whale then?
Oh, I don't know what the number for when they evolved is, but no, the question is
totally arbitrary.
Is a whale a mammal? Not is a whale a whale? So if you don't think a whale is a mammal, then what is it?
No. The whale is a mammal, but inside of its clade, it's actually not. If you go back far enough, inside of its full category.
So is a whale a mammal?
A whale, currently we call it a mammal, but what I'm showing is that all of your taxonomy is completely arbitrary.
No, just the labels are arbitrary.
No, the actual things, right? Data itself is particular, right? Nominal. You have to collect data. You have to collect
mammals or whales breathe air, have a placenta.
Yeah.
And a diaphragm. They have all the mammalian traits.
No, I understand, but the term mammal is completely arbitrary as a category, right?
All of the words you're saying are
no.
Arbitrary.
The universal. The universal. The universal mammal itself is an arbitrary term to refer to a select group of animals currently in their current state.
Nothing you just said means anything because words are all declared by arbitration.
No, the referent mammal doesn't actually exist. The universal category doesn't exist in nature, right?
Nothing you just said means anything because we decided all of these words have meaning.
That means arbitrary. Yeah. So the term category, the category animal. Look at Peterson. You're admitting it. The category mammal isn't actually found in nature.
The category mammal isn't found in nature?
Yeah, there's not a thing called mammal, the category found in nature.
There's nothing called anything in nature. We're the ones that if we didn't exist, nothing would have labels anymore. But this isn't an evolution thing. This is nothing has truth value because all words are arbitrary.
I'm talking about the referent.
Mammals, The category of mammal is not the only arbitrarily existing category in the world. So if you're going to say there's no such thing as mammals, I'm going to say everything that is the words you're using doesn't exist.
Do you know what nominalism means?
Nominalism is the belief that things are just collections, conglomerations.
It's a denial. It's a denial of universals, that they actually exist in any meaningful way. All there is particulars. Under the evolutionary view, everything you point to is just a particular. So putting it in a category. So when you see a whale and you go, that's a mammal, you're actually making a philosophical jump that evolution itself can't give you.
Evolution describes all of the characteristics that mammals have.
Yeah, but they're particulars, right? So what I'm saying is the view of evolution is nominal. That means you only have access to particular things. And you going, hey, that's a mammal, right? You're actually doing philosophy.
I wouldn't really say that.
Really?
If anybody ever labels anything at any point, no matter what they're doing philosophy. I don't know if I really grant that, but we're just gonna go in circles on this.
Okay.
So.
You got it. Thank you very much for your question coming in from Austin Sims. Strikes again. All the data fits the model. We know it does. That's a real headache for Jim. That's the model that will predict all future data / new fields of inquiry.
Okay, I'll just ask Peterson this. Can two models share the same data and have it fit, but none of them are correct?
Can two, but none of it.
Can two models have access to the same data, right? And the data actually makes sense, like, you know, philosophically, you're like, oh, this kind of data makes sense. Isn't it possible that two datas have access to the same model, but neither of the models are correct, even though the data seems to fit the models?
That seems literally impossible, because if you take the definition that true is that which corresponds to reality, and in both models the data fits, then by definition it's true. So they can't be false.
What if they contradict each other and they both share the same data and they fit the data fits each other's models and they contradict?
Well, then that's going to be something like I could invent. This is last Thursdayism. I could just say, no, the Big Bang is false. The Bible's also false. The entire universe was created last Thursday, and it just looks like this. So that's an example of what you're talking about. But I find this to be solipsistic.
No. It's really simple. It's really simple. If I imagine a world that was engineered by some being, it wasn't even God, just some being, and imagine a world that looked like this, and there was all these animals, and there was coding found, instruction manuals found in the animals, and they were all similar in the way they were coded, and they all needed air, and most of them needed air and food and all this stuff. That data actually matches quite well the idea that this is like some crafted little place, right? It's all the same data as you. It matches. It's consistent. It doesn't mean that it's true because it's consistent. This world is consistent with an engineered through an engineered lens. It doesn't mean it was engineered, but it's consistent.
Yeah, but this explodes all tenable explanations up to infinity, and now nothing has any explanatory meaning anymore.
Welcome to the limits of empiricism.
If you have a model that doesn't produce any kind of predictions, then you don't have an epistemically valuable model.
Welcome to the limits of empiricism.
And a model that relies purely on post hoc, well, yeah, but the thing I believe in could have magically done it that way.
Like evolution?
There's just nothing. No, because we make tests and all of our tests have come true.
You can't
Every
test
single one of them.
You can't test a Pakicetus turn into a whale.
You look at the genes.
That doesn't tell you. Similarity in genes.
Yes, it does.
Similarity in gene. You don't have access to the Pakicetus genes, dude.
I know, but we have access to.
So that's a contradiction.
No, it's not, because we have access to the DNA that it's
not a Pakicetus. Yeah, that's question begging.
No, Jim Bob.
Next question.
I was gonna say this earlier. You're pretending that all of this is post hoc, and you have that exactly backwards. The fossil record was constructed decades, and in some cases more than a century, before we could independently test the fossil record. You can test the fossil record. If the fossil record makes this claim, then the genetics would back it up. And then we tested the genetics and it came true. But you're pretending it's all post hoc because we live.
How many fossils that are just the fossils that we have, which is, by the way, most animals are not vertebrae, and the ones that you have that have preserved bones, how many of those do you have access to the genes as opposed to just the phenotype?
I have no idea. A very, very, very small number.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying is like you're looking back in time and making this analysis of a very small amount of data, and the amount of data you have doesn't actually accommodate how big of an assumption you're making.
But the assumption is testable. If the gene, Jim Bob, would you say that if the genetics wasn't the way it was, then that would be disconfirming evidence of evolution?
No, I would say the thing you have to delineate, Peterson, is the distinction of how you would tell that genetics, similarity in genes, can very well mostly be just similarity in function. You have to separate similarity in function as the explanation versus that they're similar because they came from each other. You don't have a methodology for distinguishing whether things are similar the DNA is similar because of function. They're functionally similar. They code and for the same behavior, or that gene actually had to pass itself down, that they're actually my great grandparents. The banana is related to me actually, like back in time, because it shares DNA that codes for a similar function. You have to separate the two.
Just real quick, Jim Bob, if humans shared more DNA with carrots than chimpanzees, then don't you think that would be extremely strong disconfirming evidence of evolution?
Well, what are you referring to as DNA? Because you can take
what?
Well, I'll tell you. Look, do you know the difference between examining DNA similarities between a banana and examining the DNA that we look at for a paternity test?
You look at a smaller percentage of the overall DNA when you do a paternity test. We can just do genes because they just look at genes and they only look at some of the genes because there's a statistical whatever. If we shared more genes, whatever your criteria is, if we shared more genes with carrots than we do with chimpanzees, wouldn't that be overwhelming strong evidence that evolution is false?
Hold on. Let me correct you because this is important.
That's my question.
No, because I asked you a question so that you can separate between two things. It's not just a small section. The STR is not just a small section. It's a specific kind of section. And we have access to the parents. That's why we can test paternity. The other thing you're looking at is the overall DNA, which is not the same as the SR, the STR. Okay, so you can't just say, oh, things are similar, and look, the reason we can do paternity tests and they're effective is because similar DNA means I come from daddy, right? No, that's a particular thing you're looking at. When you look at overall DNA, you're looking at the bases, right? You're looking at ACGT. All you're saying is that the fundamental of all living creatures has a base. That's like saying this. You look at a town and there's a lot of houses, and all of the houses share something in common. They have a foundation made of bricks, right? It doesn't follow.
Organisms pass on their DNA. Houses don't make new houses. We know how heredity works.
No. DNA you already have to have populations for the DNA.
I don't understand how that's relevant. Can I just get a yes? Can I just get a yes or no? If we shared more genes with carrots than chimpanzees, wouldn't that be very strong evidence that evolution is false?
Not necessarily, because evolution, the way you're actually talking about it, the thing you need to defend with evolution isn't whether or not things have similarities, dude. So evolution is a process that you have to use the four main components. We only covered two, the four mechanisms, and you have to explain how things change and vary, how a Pachycetus becomes a whale, not assert that it happened. Similarities in your nature, similarities in things. Like if you take one of those PCR tests, hold on. If you take a PCR test, do you know that you could eventually find similarities if you increase the amplification? You'll eventually find a crossover in structural similarity. eventually.
With the lines, yeah, but they won't all overlap.
Right. Yeah, but the thing is, all you're saying is things that are similar, they have structural similarities. In this case, DNA. Is DNA a structure?
You can call it that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it physical?
It's made of atoms, yeah.
Okay, cool. So you look at similarities between animals and you come to the conclusion, right? Evolution posits that entire categories of animals change over time into new categories of animals, right? Pointing to similarities in animals doesn't give you the process of evolution, dude.
Jim Bob, why is it that if you compare the DNA of two humans, you can tell how closely related they are, but you can't do that with two different species?
Closely related because there's a static thing called a human. That's why. Its nature is look, the answer to the question is hilarious because evolution denies the
you can't now you're just retreating to semantic fog.
There
is nothing you can say.
Why is a you're asking why is a
DNA to tell how closely related different humans are to each other?
Yeah,
but it magically stops working across species. This is totally can't possibly work for you.
No, hold on a second. All species have fundamental building blocks, right?
Yes.
That's the basis. That is the foundation. You can build different things on top of foundations, right?
This isn't how life works. Life passes on a hereditary molecule.
You have to exist to pass something down. A house, in this case, is the analogy, has to exist in a way to pass down any traits, right? So what I'm asking you is, if the foundation of all of life, they all share components, the fundamentals at the base level. They share foundation, right? Structural foundation. That's the baseline. Now, when you look at a similarity between things, of course, you look at the baseline and you say they all share the similarity at the baseline. But when you start making other comparisons above the foundation, like the same walls or the same wall color or the same type of roof in this analogy, right? There are things you can...
Because the shared genes are so incredibly specific. And there's no reason, like your house analogy fails for the reasons I gave earlier. Look, there's no reason that if evolution is false, then dolphin fins and shark fins, the genetic underlying component.
Okay, let me respond. One more.
100% not.
Last word, please.
As long as
short. I promise he gets the last word.
Sure. Look, if your argument is similarity, therefore we come from each other, the further you go back in time, whether it's genetic or it's phenotypical, you get to dissimilarity. So now you have to argue how completely dissimilar things are the ancestors and produce the things today. The similarity argument, the methodology of similarity, whether it's phenotype or genotype, you can only do locally. The further you go back in your book of creation, your own creation myth of evolution, the further you go back, the less similar all things are from things today, right? So it's like you saying, look at similar things, look at similar DNA. The only way that could be the case is if it comes from each other. And yet I simultaneously hold that if you go back in time, that's actually not true. It's not similar.
Go to the next one. Hate to do this, but this one do appreciate it. Jack Fetter says, Jim Bob spent the entire time arguing the analogies weren't accurate or applicable or what he doesn't agree with in evolution, never really arguing anything to prove his side, much like flat Earth.
For one, I didn't have a positive side. Two, I think we only spent about 6 minutes on the analogy part, and we admitted that we didn't want to get caught up on that. The rest of the argument, it might as well just be poopy smear.
Flavius Asinasis says, if I'm a fish, why do drown in the primordial curry, water? Planet Peterson, give me back my gills.
I haven't had curry in a while.
Yeah, I don't understand that one. Daniel De La Noche says, I wonder if it bothers Jim Bob that he has to constantly misunderstand and misrepresent Peterson's analogies in order to avoid agreeing.
I thought I prepared for those analogies, and I thought I adequately placed the differences and the symmetry breakers between reference things in the world that are animals changing over time, and language, which is arbitrarily, I could change it tomorrow if I want to. It has nothing to do with the real world. It's a symbol. And further, the color, the frequencies of color don't change. You don't wait around waiting for the frequency of blue to finally become not blue. The fact there's a gradient means there's just different frequencies. Those things are universally static.
You got it. And this one coming in from Danny Zook says, are humans fusing with technology for survival like transhumanists an example of real-time mutation or a self-engineered demise similar to failed animal species?
Well, it's not a mutation, clearly. Yeah, I mean, there are probably examples of animals that have evolved behaviors that through bad luck ended up resulting in their demise through changes in their environment. So yeah, I guess it would be more similar to that.
You got it. This one from, do appreciate your question as well. And folks, we cannot take any more new questions as we've got a lot to go through still. This one
Oh
from
boy.
Danny Zoo, we got that. Handsome Cat says, creationists like Jim Bob have to deny that DNA can prove someone is our cousin if he denies that bonobos are our closest living cousins as a species.
Again, you're affirming that there are these universal categories that you have no standard for, and this debate has nothing to do with creation. In fact, an evolution denier could very well be someone who doesn't believe in God.
Chase K says, Peterson, how are there distinct functions to in of themselves, i.e., a flipper has the function to swim versus a foot has the function to walk?
Form follows function. So I don't understand how this is supposed to be a gotcha. Dolphins are streamlined, torpedo shaped things with stabilizing structures called fins on them.
This one from American Nacho says, PP, you asserted that there, quote, definitely transitional fossil record of inner ear development, followed by, quote, I'm very ignorant on it. Which is it?
I don't think I said that. I said I'm ignorant on the vestibular system, but for parts of the inner ear, we do have really good fossils of that. I actually have it pulled up on a tab over here, but I know we're kind of pressed for time, so.
This one coming in from, do appreciate it. KFJ says, Peterson, how would you falsify evolution? No unfalsifiable answers, please.
Yeah, again, this is like evolution, the test for evolution was genetics, because if all organisms are related, what happens is organisms pass on their DNA. That's what happens. So all life on the planet would have to share DNA. That would be necessary for evolution. And the degree of relatedness would have to be very, very highly and predictably correlated. And all those things came exactly true. Now, what I'm doing is I'm saying if it hadn't worked out that way, then that would have falsified evolution. It really wouldn't be rescuable after that. Does that one thing prove like 100% evolution? No, but it's proof of evolution. It's extremely strong proof, by which I mean evidence of evolution.
This one from, do appreciate it. 3.14 slices of pie says, question for PP, how does evolution affirm transgenderism?
It probably doesn't, because that's a cultural phenomenon. Evolution doesn't really affirm the economy, or it doesn't really affirm. I'm reading a book about the evolution of language right now, but language might just be an accidental byproduct of evolution. So no, I mean, cultural things are not subject to natural selection.
This one from, do appreciate it. American Nacho says, follow up, how long do we think creatures just stumbled around drunkenly while their inner ear function developed?
I don't have the timeline for the development of vestibular systems. It's knowable. I just don't know it off the top of my head. But this is the argument that if something doesn't have the current modern day form that we see in organisms, then it doesn't work, and the organism can't survive. This is literally false. There's actually a group of frogs. I can't remember what they're called. They live in South America, and they're really miniature. They've gotten so small that their vestibular system actually doesn't work anymore. So when they jump, they have no sense of balance and they tumble randomly in the air. It's actually really funny. Look them up. Yet they're not endangered. They're actually doing just fine. So there you go.
This one from, they say Peterson has hot eyes. It's from someone
True.
named Nathan. I don't know if that makes you like it more or less, but Eric Peterson, Eric says at some point a whale was something else. Was that a mammal?
Yeah, we went over that earlier. The immediate ancestor of whales still is a mammal. The ancestor of that, because whales have only been around for like 50 million years, probably less than that. Mammals have been around for 240 million years.
This one from, do appreciate it. Chase K says, Argrin 113 for both ERVs, fossil viruses fixed in our genome when sperm or egg cells got infected. Humans and apes share 200,000 plus ERVs in the exact same spots. The odds of this happening by chance are near zero. Please give your thoughts.
Yeah, the back end of that assumes that it's random, right? So it's like, if all else is equal, it would be random, but you're assuming that it's not deliberate or coded, or it prefers, the ERV prefers that spot for a reason, a biological reason, that it inserts itself into that spot and it doesn't try that spot again. The similarities between human beings and chimps or apes, again, we're back to, does DNA, similarity in DNA, is it similar because the function is similar? That's the approach I take until I have a reason to believe otherwise. But the ERV argument is silly because I ask these people all the time, okay, why do you add the last part? The odds are extraordinarily rare for it to show up. Well, you know what? First of all, you can't tell me how you know it's random. Second of all, guess what? It's not more rare or unlikely than all the other things that you need for evolution to have occurred to begin with. I can tell you that.
So real quick on this, like Jim Bob, you talk about functional things, but actually there are known pseudogenes in our DNA. Like there are parts of our DNA that have no function, that have mutated to the point where they don't work at all anymore. And we can find exactly the same ones in chimpanzees. And common inheritance is the only rational good explanation.
No, function and dysfunction would be in the same category. If there's things, there's
no reason to put the same dysfunctions in the same place.
Let me answer.
Heredity answers that. Nothing else adequately.
Well, no. Now you need the apes, the ones that we inherited it from. You need them to inherit it from another animal, and so on. Yeah. Well, isn't it possible there needs to be a point in time where the first insertion happened and it wasn't hereditary?
Well, yeah. Well, with ERVs, yeah, because they actually come from viruses.
Okay, hold on. If your argument is it only could be hereditary, except it doesn't need to be hereditary, I don't understand what you're saying.
It becomes part of your genome through a virus, but then you pass it on. They're retroviruses like HIV.
Okay.
The virus infects you, but then the DNA from the virus actually gets into your
then how would you determine the origin between the ape and the man having it in a similar place? How would you determine the origin wasn't? How would you falsify? How would you determine it wasn't hereditary and passed down by common lineage?
If they weren't at the same loci, locus points.
No.
This is the other thing. It's actually not like you're right that it's not random, because our genome is huge, but there are only certain sites where the retrovirus can insert. Yet the question was way off. We share 205 roughly, not 200,000. But of the 212 that we have, they have 205 of the same ones. It could have inserted in any of 10 million locations,
but it didn't.
But 90.
Yeah, I know. Peterson.
whatever percent of them
You
are
didn't-
the same.
You're not answering the question.
98%.
If the data is they're in the same spot, and your conclusion is they're in the same spot because we share a lineage and they're passed down through sexual reproduction. That's the claim about the data. How do you falsify that it was passed down? How would you know it wasn't passed down if all the data was the same?
If they were in completely different
No,
sites
that's
on the
different
DNA,
data.
or
No,
if
dude.
there's another way that or the genetics told us that us and chimpanzees are the most closely related. But if you could look in the DNA and find something else in the DNA that would falsify that claim, then that would count. So if chimpanzees shared way more retrovirus insertions with some random animal like a rabbit than they do with us, then that would be disconfirming of the genetic evidence directly.
You really didn't answer the question. We might have to move on, but once more,
I disagree that I didn't answer it.
The question was, if the data was the same, you know what you did? You changed the data. I said, if the data was the same, you found an ERV in the same spot, and you thought, well, it's in the same spot because we have a common ancestor, and through sex, we got it. We inherited it.
Then if our genes were completely different, that's how you would falsify it.
No. If the genes are similar, because we have similar function, right?
ERV's genes, two different things. You're right that I did change it. My bad. If the ERV data was exactly the same, but the genetic, because the ERV data and between chimps and us is the most similar than it is to any other two organisms. So is that from heredity? Well, you'd have to test the genes to find out. And if the genes said, no, you and chimps aren't even close to the same, then those would be conflicting, those would be contradictions. So that's, yes, you could falsify it, but the exact opposite is what happened.
This one coming in from, do appreciate it. Chase K says H2O being possible prior to it occurring asserts for intentionality in nature. Naturalism rejects purpose, foresight, and intentionality.
That's true. That's why bringing up the question of whether or not any of the things that function, are they incidentally functioning? And I would ask Peterson the same question. Is there anything that truly is properly or improperly functioning in the body?
It would be like all you could do is compare functions across
typical
members of the like you could take a baseline average and then compare it that way.
Okay, but it wouldn't be if the typical way in which the heart and the brain worked and everything operated, the stomach and the passing of, defecating and the liver doing its job, it's all doing a job to keep the body alive. But you're saying that through the evolutionary view, it's only typical that it's doing that, but it's not operating properly. So when you go to the doctor and he says, "Oh, Peterson, whatever you're going through with your thing, this isn't functioning properly," you're just taking that to mean typically.
Yeah, because if we exist, then the mean, like the average of the species, represents the average level of fitness. So that's, you can call that your baseline. I don't see any issue there.
Well, the issue is with epistemology, because if you held that view, then you'd have to admit your own brain. The brains only operate typically, but there's not a proper way the brain works. There's a typical way the brain works.
Well, so yeah, I don't know what proper means. Like, we can describe the way the brain works, but like, we understand pathology so incredibly well, and some people have synesthesia. Some people
Peterson, understanding something well assumes that there's a proper way to understand things.
But I don't know what you mean by that. We can just
understanding something well means there's an effective, proper way to understand things, that there's a proper way to analyze and evaluate things. But under your view, if every appendage in your body is incidentally doing what it's doing, then the brain doing what it does, there's no proper way to evaluate the world. There's no proper way to understand. It's just typical. It's just, you typically have the experience of that. But the fact is, under this view, if there's no proper way to think under the evolutionary view, because what the brain does is purely incidental, then you really don't have any position philosophically to say you're properly understanding the view of evolution or anything else. It's just an incidental brain doing stuff. There's no standard for a proper way of thinking under evolution. There's just a brain that does stuff. Right?
This one from.
Go ahead.
We're going to speed through these last three. Jack Fetter says, I don't claim to be an expert on the topic, but JB's defense seems to be morphing dangerously close to nah-uh.
I don't think so.
JB disagrees. Joe Vargas says, dummies in the chat. Whoa, geez. Support words don't matter. They have no real meaning. Total madness. What the? I don't know what that means. Log host says, Jim Bob wishes he had Peterson's beard. You Viking.
No, he has a decent beard, but I'm right up there.
Wow, no, yours is better.
Well, because of the gray.
Big, beautiful beards. Everybody likes big, beautiful beards. But I want to say, folks, check out both of our big, beautiful bearded friends. Links in the description box. What are you waiting for? You can even just, if you're lazy, I don't want to go to the description box. You can click on their titles, their names that are hyperlinked in the YouTube title. Just do that. It's very easy. Watch your content, subscribe, and that way, even if you don't agree with them, you can throw your poop at them in the comments of their videos. Check out their content. Want to say a huge thank you. It's been a pleasure. Eric and Made by Jim Bob, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. One more thing. I'm going to continue to stream. I assume Peterson might too, but you guys are willing to jump on. I'm going to try to do a little mini panel after if you guys want to. Opposition, welcome. So.
Amazing. Well, check them out, guys. Thank you guys for being with us. I'll be back in a moment to let you know about upcoming debates, including, as you can see at the bottom right of your screen, Rachel Wilson takes on Brian Shapiro on feminism. That's this month, guys. Check out the links pinned at the top of the chat and the description box. You don't want to miss it. I'll be back in a moment. Amazing. Thank you guys for your support. I'm going to wrap it up pretty quick here as we have got big, beautiful debates that I want to tell you about. So you can see behind me, DebateCon 8, Dallas, Texas. It's happening in Dallas, Texas, July 25th and July 26th. We're expecting to sell out, like no doubt about it. At this point, so many people have bought tickets, 114. And we have 3 months to promote it. Last time we DebateCon 6, our record was 210 people who got tickets. Right now, we are already more than halfway there. We're at 200. We're at 114, and we still have 3 whole months to promote this. I'm telling you guys, it's going to sell out. There's no doubt about it. Get your tickets to ensure that you are going to be there. Don't wait if you're kind of like, yeah, it'd be fun to do. It's going to happen. I'm kind of considering now, like, are we going to have to find a different venue that can fit? Because if I'm anticipating right now 350 people in person, which by the way, a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to get people to come out for an event in person, to get people to fill seats. It's really tough. 210 was a huge milestone for us. We were very excited about that. The fact that we're already at 114 and we have over 3 months to promote it is unreal. I have no doubt we're going to surpass 300. And by the way, when we do get to, technically the room is supposed to seat 250. It can sit 300. We might get up to 350, in which case we're probably going to have to move to a different venue. That's how popular this thing is. Check out DebateCon 8. Also, I had mentioned Rachel and Andrew will be debating at the end of this month on the East Coast in North Carolina and South Carolina. You don't want to miss those debates. That is linked in the description box as well. Also, last but not least, I'm going to go over to the upcoming debates. We will have a debate on whether or not, this is coming up, it's going to be exciting, Noah's Ark on trial, whether or not Noah's Ark could have worked. In other words, could it have fit all the animals and all the food? Could they have disposed of waste? All those technically, like the things are, it's like, is this feasible? You could say a feasibility debate. That's going to be huge. That's going to be on Monday. Also, on Tuesday, we might have a debate on Israel and versus Palestine. Then we're also going to have on the 24th. So I think that's about a week from now, on Friday, actually. We're going to have a debate on Are Black Americans the biblical Israelites? So we're going to have a gentleman who's a Christian, and we're going to have a gentleman who is a Black Hebrew Israelite. It's going to be controversial. It is going to trigger everybody. It might even get us demonetized just for that video, though. Not, I think we'll be all right. In fact, but it is going to be controversial. It's probably, I'm going to have to say things and read questions that I'm really uncomfortable reading, but it's good. You get all for your pleasure. You get to enjoy me looking all uncomfortable. Now, like I said, check out, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. We do appreciate your support. Also, check out our channel memberships. They're amazing. I'm going to wrap up. Want to say thank you guys. Click that join button, though, and check out those channel memberships, as we are excited to have you here. We appreciate your guys' support and all the different ways that you give it. If you didn't know, we also have, really quick, I'm going to do this, TikTok. We have a TikTok for Modern Day Debate. I'm going to pin that in the live chat. You can check that out as well. Is if you have TikTok and you're like, yeah, TikTok is cool, check out the Modern Day Debate TikTok. And the reason that's important is because if you like short form content, we are putting out a lot of short form content. And also DebateCon 8, that again, I'm throwing that in the live chat. And then also what I'm going to throw in the live chat is, if you didn't know, we do have a Facebook page for Modern Day Debate. It's brand spanking new, and we are getting this rolling. So check out the Modern Day Debate Facebook page. Want to say thank you guys for all of your support. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Have a great rest of your night. I will see you at the next debate, which is this Monday, and it's going to be amazing. Thanks for your support, guys. Love you. Take care. Thank you guys for all your support of Modern Day Debate. It means more than you know. And the debaters are the lifeblood of the channel. Check out their links. We appreciate them. They make this channel awesome. Take care. We'll see you at the next debate.